We're now live. Excellent. Welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021 to 2022. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting here today in Sydney. I'd also like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present and any who may be watching today. I welcome Minister Victor Dominello and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolio of customer service and digital. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness, according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution passed by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness can only answer if they have more time or with certain documents to hand, and in these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take these questions on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via teleconference, or video conference rather. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who their questions are directed to? And could I ask everyone speaking remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? Could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Dominello, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you've already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. But for all other witnesses, I ask that you each in turn state your full name, position, title and agency, and then swear either an oath or an affirmation, and the words of both the oath and the affirmation are either on the table in front of you or have been emailed to you by the Secretariat. So I will commence with Mr. Rees.
Thank you, Chair. Damon Rees, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Ms Hogan?
I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And can I go to Mr Dent?
I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr Brady?
I swear the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Mr Murphy?
I, William Murphy, solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And just, I think we're okay for the past witnesses, but for the future witnesses, if you could also state your position title after your name and before the oath or affirmation, that would be useful. Mr Wells?
Good morning, Greg Wells, the Governor, Chief Information and Digital Officer. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Ms Webb?
Rose Webb, Deputy Secretary for the Regulation Division. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth.
Thank you. Ms Tidd?
I, Elizabeth Tidd, Information Commissioner, swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank
So
you.
help me God.
Thank you. Ms Gavel?
I, Samantha Gavel, Privacy Commissioner, swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you, Ms Gavel. Mr Crawford?
Philip Crawford, Chair of the Migrant and Authority. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Ms Livingston?
I, Elizabeth Livingston, CEO of Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you very much to all of you. Today's hearing will be conducted from 9:30 to 12:45 with the Minister and departmental witnesses, with questions from the opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of session for government questions. And just a reminder that we will have a COVID-safe break from 11 till 11:15. So if I interrupt your questions at that time, that is why. As there's no provision for any witness to make an opening statement before the committee commences questioning, we'll begin with questions from the opposition. Mr Searle.
Thank you, Ms Boyd. Welcome, Minister.
Thanks, Mr Searle.
During the earlier round of budget estimates earlier this year, the Electoral Commission gave some disturbing evidence about the lack of preparedness of the Electoral Commission to meet the cybersecurity standards put in place by the government. And in answer to questions taken on notice, your department or you said the following: on 6 September, the business case of the New South Wales Electoral Commission was undergoing assurance and review by an independent panel as part of DRF requirements. My question is, how much additional funding has been sought by the Electoral Commission through this process?
I don't have the specific number, but Ms Hogan might.
Mr Wells would be best to answer that.
So we are currently working with the Electoral Commission on that business case. Their total requested, I'm getting a terrible echo, but I'll try. The total requested $22 million, but we are working with the Electoral Commission on the assurance of that business case and a number of critical recommendations that need to be addressed. We are also working with the Electoral Commission on approval for a seed business, which will allow them to get started much faster.
Okay, well, that was going to be my next question. Noting that local government elections are less than 6 weeks away and the state may be facing up to 5 state by-elections in the near future, when do you anticipate the Electoral Commission will actually get its hands on the additional resources?
That's dependent on their progress.
Okay.
So through the business case process, I would also say that Cybersecurity New South Wales provides a range of support to the Electoral Commission in terms of monitoring vulnerabilities, capability, and a range of support we provide already. It's not just dependent on this.
All right. Well, can you tell me the date the submission from the Electoral Commission was received?
I'll grab that on notice.
Thank you. When do you anticipate the assurance and review process will be finalised?
That really does depend on the Electoral Commission's action of those critical recommendations as part of the assurance process. That's a process that all agencies go through, part of getting business cases approved.
Okay. Can you tell me who comprises the independent panel and how are they chosen in this process?
We have a range. I don't know if there's anything that is everyone else getting that too?
Yes,
no.
On the line, but not everybody in here.
Okay. So, Mr. Searle, the panel is chosen from, members are chosen from a panel of experts that are the ICT assurance arrangements. So they're assessing that in efforts to the Electoral Commission at the moment.
Okay. And do you have any assessment or rough time horizon by which the process may be finalised?
I don't have a rough time horizon, but as I said, we've progressed through that process at the moment. We're working closely with them.
Okay. So those independent panel members, are they outside the public sector? They're from the private sector? They're brought in because of their expertise? Or are they public sector employees?
Yeah, generally, Mr. Searle has a mix of our ICT assurance team as well as independent experts. So it's still a mix of them.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've taken that as far as we can. Minister...
Before December? Is it going to be done before 4 December?
Well, that's a very good question, yes. But I don't think the witness could tell us when the time is. Well, can you assure us that the funding will be received by the Electoral Commission in time for it to make the December local government elections cyber security safe?
I think, as I said before, Mr. Searle, this depends on a range of First of all, we're doing a lot to get the Electoral Commission reviewed for local elections and in general. Even if the funding for the business case was received, it's a process of improvement that will be implemented over weeks, months and years.
Okay, Minister, I might just return to you. Given the, I guess, in my words, alarming evidence given by the Electoral Commissioner earlier this year about his agency's complete lack of preparedness on the cybersecurity front, it doesn't sound like this issue is being attended to by the government you're a part of with any degree of alarm or urgency. Can you give this committee and the community any kind of comfort that this matter is going to be addressed in time for the local government elections?
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that we have cybersecurity in New South Wales shows the degree of importance and urgency we place on this issue, because we know that being the most digitally advanced state, we have an obligation to make sure it's not just provides great services, but it's also trusted in the sense that it's private and secure, and cyber goes a long way to that.
Yeah.
And can I also say, Mr. Sewell, that forget my assessment, there's an intermediate report that gets published every year, and New South Wales for the last 5 years, to my best of my recollection, is number one. And on the cyber readiness report, I think in 2020, we were number two. We've got a score, I think, of 9.3 out of 10, only second to the Feds. And just in terms of money, we are putting 1.6 billion into digital restart. Phase 1, Phase 2 was another $500 million. And 240 million of that in Phase 1 was for cyber, and of Phase 2 I think it was about 75 million. So the suggestion that the government is not taking this seriously couldn't be further from the truth. You know, we realise how important it is, and I appreciate your questions, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that when we are investing, whether it's in cyber or any other digital asset, it's invested wisely and in an integrated way. Otherwise, we're going to create a worse problem, not a better solution.
Well, that may be so, but it's now been, I think, 7 months since the Electoral Commissioner's evidence. If you're seeking $22 million in a $90+ billion budget, it doesn't seem like a lot of money. And this is not the first time the Electoral Commissioner has given evidence to parliamentary inquiries about what appears to be the sort of systematic underfunding of his agency.
Yeah.
Now, a lack of cyber security around, the integrity of our electoral system. In 7 months, the government hasn't been able to even allocate the money. It seems to me to be a pretty poor process.
Well, there is no doubt, and as you appropriately asked, there is a series of questions that need to be answered between the Commission and the agency. But again, there is a rigorous assessment process and assurance process. Now, I'm not saying it's the Commission's fault. Maybe they are complying and ticking every box. I don't know, but maybe they're not.
Well, I'd like you to take on notice, if you could, why it's taken 7 months.
Yeah, we'll take it on notice.
That we still don't even have a funding decision from
Yeah,
government.
no, we'll take that on notice. It's a fair question.
You ready?
Okay, yep. Minister, I just wanted to ask about
Graham.
how are you?
Good morning.
I just wanted to ask about the QR check-ins. How many QR check-ins are we seeing, say, each week at the moment, as people are moving around New South Wales?
Oh, each week. I know we're about to hit the billion mark of total check-ins.
Yeah.
Mr. Rees, do you know? Well, I can tell you on my phone.
Yeah, I'm just looking on my phone.
Currently approximately 10 million per day.
10 million per day, yeah. And I imagine that's a key, tracking those numbers is a key indication about actual compliance with this. You'd be quite interested in how those numbers are tracking over time, yeah.
And we saw, even before the Delta outbreak, Mr. Graham, we could see that, and it's not a criticism, it's just when people in a false sense of security because they see no infection rates, people just, drop their guard.
Yeah, it is.
So
It is a leading indicator.
You're right. It's an early indicator.
Yeah. One of the views you've put is that you've said you thought QR codes should be retired once we get to the 90% mark. You had quite an interesting reason for it, I thought, which was about community trust.
Yes.
About government. So you said, I think QR codes should be retired once we get to the 90% mark.
Yeah, it was
subject to health advice. Yeah. How are plans going for that? Is that still your plan?
I at the time I expressed they were my views because I do believe that governments have a responsibility to turn on systems like this during situations like a pandemic, but arguably they have an even greater responsibility to turn them off when it's appropriate to do so. And again, we'll be guided by health advice, but my strong view is that as soon as we get the signal from health, we should be retiring them until hopefully we never need them again. But who knows? There could be another strain coming out of Africa or some other country that's got poor vaccination rates because the world hasn't done its job of vaccinating the world yet.
Or high-risk settings.
Or there could be high-risk settings. So, but it was just an opinion I raised at the time because I really believe that when it comes to trust, in digital service delivery, it is paramount, particularly in the 21st century.
Turning to the COVID Safe app and the COVID Safe alerts, which you've promoted in the past, have been in the news this morning. When did that case alert practice commence? The story in the paper today suggests at the end of September. Was it September 30?
Mr. Rees, would you want to answer that?
Yes, there's been a couple of steps. So we've had the history of your check-ins in the app for some time.
Yep.
Late September, I can't remember if it was the 30th, but it was late September, we added, based on the data that was published on newsouthwales.gov, we added an indication of where a venue had experienced a COVID positive case.
Yep.
What we did earlier this week was greatly enhanced that feature. So now it looks at when there's a COVID positive case, who are the individuals that are there within the 24-hour period following, and it updates your history to show you that.
Yep.
And then on Friday, we'll add the missing piece, which is the push notification to proactively draw attention.
So
to
Mr. Rees, sorry, could I ask you to bring the microphone slightly closer to you?
Apologies.
Thank you.
And when did that first change occur that you just referred to? About a week ago. When was that switched on?
So the enhanced level of updates, I think, took place earlier this week.
Mm-hmm. And you'll move to, what will you move to this Friday?
So on Friday, customers who opt in to receive them will get a push notification indicating that something in their history has changed and that they should go and check.
So it'll no longer be buried in your history. You're unlikely to see that. You'll actually be alerted to it in a more more comprehensive way.
But I mean, pleasantly, we've seen, I think, over 580,000 people actually check their history. So it is giving some value. But I certainly agree the push notification is the important additional.
Right, but they
piece
may
that we
be
need.
different to the 700,000 people who've reportedly, or 700,000 alerts that have gone out. There's no guarantee that the people checking their history will be the ones getting the alerts. Is that correct?
I think that number refers to the people that have checked their history where there is a notification, and then the push notifications we hope to add on Friday, which will, I think, be the additional piece that's needed there to draw as much attention as possible.
And those case alerts, to whom are they sent? Is it only if you're regarded as a close contact, or what's the criteria for when they're actually sent to you? When I get a push notification on Friday, how am I selected? What's the criteria?
Yes, I believe the current the current methodology that's been agreed with health is if there's been a confirmed visit to a venue by someone who is COVID positive, if you have visited that venue within the 24 hours following, then that would appear on your history, and from Friday you would get the notification asking you to check your history.
So I might be a close contact, I might be a casual contact, depending on the health assessment that subsequently happens about that venue, but
That's right. But
case I'll get a...
This mechanism,
get an
I
alert.
don't believe, distinguishes.
Correct,
And
okay.
Can I just add there, Mr. Graham, that the message will be one that suggests that you need to monitor for symptoms, and if they arise, to get tested. It's not you need to isolate or you've been considered this type of contact. It's just simply a courtesy alert to let you know you may have been in a venue.
Yeah, and the material's clear about that. Minister, the industry experts have been reasonably scathing about this capacity. One of them said this had been better developed a year ago. Another said it's almost useless without that push notification. What response have you got to those experts?
this agency has got through so much work, and obviously a lot of this has to be driven in collaboration with health. It's not just something that's coming out of this agency. So we need the information from health. And both Service New South Wales and health have been literally working around the clock for the last year. So you're right, I agree. You know, in a perfect world, you would pick this product off the shelf and delivered it from the sky. But the reality is it had to be built and it had to be prioritised. No other state, Mr. Graham, no other state has it. No other state. And no other state has the capacity of Service New South Wales nor the app. No one. So,
yeah, and Minister, as you know, the opposition's been quite supportive of this app being rolled out.
Yeah, I know.
We've been on the record about that.
Yeah.
But at this point, this would have been better a year ago.
Yeah, but Mr. Graham,
seems like a fair one.
I don't disagree with you, Mr. Graham. It would have been. But we had border passes we had to do a year ago when there was an outbreak in Victoria. And then we had all these other things.
Yeah.
Like, it has been non-stop. And we have to prioritise the resources based on, again, health recommendations as to what is most important to them. But theoretically, I do not disagree with you. But practically, it is about priorities. And, the poor teams have been working around the clock. Not just our team, but health as well.
And Minister, how does this, one of the things I don't understand is how this interacts with your view that we might move away from QR codes. We'll hit 90% in New South Wales around mid-November. This capacity is only just now coming online. Doesn't that mean that we'll be getting push alerts for the next 2 weeks, but after that, if we turned off the QR codes, if we retired them, this capacity becomes relatively ineffective?
Well, again, I think from memory, I said something to the effect that if it's 90, 95% or whatever the figure was, i.e. a high figure as recommended by health. Again, it's not. I'm not the epidemiologist, but if health says, look, we've got saturation at 96%, or whatever the figure is, I don't know, then that's, and at 96%, we know that we're not going to get any more people vaccinated at that point. Then you will see, I can almost guarantee, London to a brick, particularly if the case numbers come down to 0, as we saw pre-Delta, that compliance will wane again. And then...
Well, let me... you were more specific than that. I'll tell you what you said. I think QR codes should be retired once we get to the 90% mark.
Yeah, but
that is in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, but
this capacity's only just come online.
That was...
I'm interested in how those two things interact. Don't we get
Graham,
2 weeks of
okay.
notifications and then
let him answer
this is over?
He's actually asking a question.
All right, order.
Chance for a speech,
John.
Badgering the minister.
Okay, order.
I'm trying to contextualise what I said, and I think I said in the body of that, subject to health advice.
Yes, no, and to be fair, you did.
Yeah, right. So, and, back then, Ms. Chant was saying 90, and then she subsequently said we might get to 95%. So, again, subject to health advice as to what saturation point is. Once we get to saturation point, I still think that there will be a place for QR codes in high-risk settings. That's my personal view, such as nursing homes, retirement villages.
But for the ordinary citizen going around their day, it might be voluntary or it might be retired altogether. In any case, in your view, compliance will drop off.
I think this is my personal view, that if we get to a point where there is no infection in community, and we've got high vaccination rates, like 95%, whatever the figure is from health, and the community go back to an understandable default position of very low compliance, then from a behavioural insights point of view, it is better, and a trust point of view, it is better to say to the community, look, there is no material risk here in low-risk environments, therefore you don't have to do it. But in the event that there is a spike in numbers in March, April, May, you can turn it back on. And then
So we hit that number in 2 weeks' time, that 90%. At the same time, health is talking about scaling down contact tracing, which might make this more important. Doesn't that make it concerning to retire the QR codes? If there's less contact tracing... if this capacity's only just come online, well, not online yet.
Again, Mr. Graham, this is my view.
Yeah, I'm interested in your view as the responsible minister.
I'm glad you're asking for it. So my
Beautiful. It's beautiful to watch.
My humble opinion is that we solved the medical science issue pretty much in the first 6 months of the pandemic. People worked out what you need to do. In fact, started developing a vaccine. Since then, it's been a behavioural science issue of how we actually guide the population in getting vaccinated, in making sure there is compliance until we get to those saturation numbers. So my view, and again it's my view, that if there are low risk settings in the community and health advised, then I think it is absolutely the right thing to do to retire the QR codes. And that way, if you do need to turn them back on again, because there is hypothetically an escalation or because hypothetically there is a new risk that we did not foresee, then the community will trust us and say, yes, this is a proportionate government. They only do things as is required, not because they just love forcing us to do things.
Thank you. Opposition time has expired. Mr. Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Minister, nice to see you.
And great to see you, Mr. Shoebridge.
The extended team you brought. It's lovely to see.
Oh, Mr. Shoebridge.
There is a lot of love in this room, so let's get straight into it.
Ask the questions.
Minister, you must have been very distressed to see CIRA saying there was a red level warning, a sort of major warning about the decline in return to work rates in the workers' comp scheme. That must have caused you sleepless nights.
Oh, well, it was, I think Mr. Dent answered that by saying that he disagreed with that assessment, and it was an error that it was published without the appropriate checks and balances.
So you're fine with the return to work rates in the workers' comp system?
Well, again, I back in Mr. Dent, and moreover, I back in the experts that have trawled through the system. There is, however, Mr. Shoebridge, I hasten to add before you throw a missile. I hasten to add, there's always improvement that must be made. And
well,
McDougall says
that's the understatement of the year, isn't it? Because do you know what the return to work rate is now at 4 weeks? 4 weeks after injury?
No, not precisely. No. I do.
Ms. Hogan, do you know what it is?
I'm not sure.
Mr. Dent, do you know what it is?
Morning, Mr. Shoebridge. As published on June 21 or now? As at now? You're referring to that dashboard?
Do you want to answer instead? What? Bit of a guessing game.
Mr. Mookie knows the number.
Yeah, do you want to?
It was 63 yesterday. I'm trying to find out what it is today.
So July 21, the system 4-week performance was at 64%.
Oh. Yeah, but the rate you advised the Herald on only last week was 63%. So I'm asking you what the current rate is, Mr. Dent.
63% is the rate for the nominal insurer at July 21.
Yep. And can you tell me, so it's at 63%. How would you describe that as a performance measure?
Well, it's 4 weeks, it's not ideal. The target is around 70% for eye care, so there's no question about the fact that's not a perfect outcome.
Do you know what the rate was as recently as December 2017, Mr. Dent?
I don't have the December 2017 rate to hand, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, well, what if I was to tell you it was 76%? So it was 76% return to work rates in December 2017.
What is the problem?
We're now at 63% for the nominal insurer. That is a dramatic failure, isn't it, in just the last 3 years?
No one's arguing that a single worker returning to work late is a good thing at all.
Mr. Dent, can you give us an understanding of how many workers that represents in a given year? A collapse from 76% return to work after 4 weeks down to 63% now. How many does that mean? Is it 10,000, 20,000, 30,000?
I'd have to take that number on notice.
Minister, what do you say about the system being regulated by CIRA, which has seen a collapse in return to work rates from 76% at the end of 2017 down to 63% now? What do you say as the minister responsible for CIRA about that performance?
It's definitely not good enough, and we need to do better. And there's no doubt about that. There is no doubt about that. I accept that, but that's why we asked for that root and branch review by McDougall. That was done. And we accelerated the 5-year review to encapsulate everything. So, yeah, it's not like we have hidden away from it. We understand there are problems and we're trying to deal with them.
You say it's not like you're hiding away from it. You deleted the report from the CIRA's website. I can't think of a sort of better description of hiding it.
No, I personally didn't.
Your government deleted the report from the CIRA website. You put it up. You said there's a problem here. When it was picked up by the media, you deleted it. That's hiding it.
No. Mr. Dent indicated that he did not agree with the report, and again, you can ask him in terms of the details of it. And there's a whole lot of material that, as you would appreciate, Mr. Shoebridge, government's a big beast, and there's a whole lot of material that goes through the various echelons. But you know,
well, why don't I ask Mr. Dent?
Yeah.
Mr. Dent, the conclusion that the return to work rate had collapsed to 59% that was published on your website, who authored that report? How did that come to be on the website?
So that dashboard, Mr. Shoebridge, was authored internally by our compliance and performance review team. They used a different metric than the one we publish on the rest of our website. So there are two ways to look at return to work rates. The first being the 12-month rolling average that we publish transparently on our open data portal. The alternative way of looking at it is a 3-month rolling average from the date of injury, which was what that report was based on. My concern with that report being published is that while that number is correct, if you're looking at the 12-month rolling average you might have otherwise seen, and then you see that number which reflects a shorter period of time, you might confuse that the numbers look worse than they were. So they were both accurate using the methodology they were used to calculate, but where we didn't publish sufficient nuance to explain that report became one that might look alarming.
So it was
indeed true.
Yeah. So it was accurate. It was true, but it was alarming. So that's why you deleted it. It was accurate. It was true, but it was alarming, and that's why it got deleted.
That is not why it was deleted, Mr. Shoebridge. It was inconsistent with the methodology we used to publish other information.
Inconsistent with the other truth.
That published in that report didn't have, I think, sufficient robustness in how we described how we arrived at that conclusion.
Going back to the 4-week return to work rates, Minister, you say that you've had the McDougall report, that there's reform, that it's all. I would assume that things would be going in the right direction over the last 12 months.
Sorry, Mr. Rich, what was that?
I'm assuming that you've put in place measures as a government to make sure this has been turned around over the last 12 months. You'd be expecting to see some improvement, given the work you've done over the last 12 months. Would that be the expectation?
Well, you'd hope there's always improvement, yes. That's a fair assumption.
So, what if I was to tell you that the 4-week return to work rate at the end of last year, let's pick a date, let's pick August of last year. At the 4-week return to work rate at August last year was 69%. It's got worse. It's now at 63%. You say that you've got this under control,
but when
it's got dramatically worse. It's fallen by 10% effectively.
Yeah, and that's why we asked McDougall to do the root and branch review. And as you know, sometimes things get worse before they get better. Mr. Dent will be able to tell you how far into the adoption of recommendations from McDougall that we're into.
Mr. Dent, how much worse is it going to get? The minister's told us it's going to get worse before it gets better. How much worse is it going to get?
Point of order, Chair.
I didn't say that.
There's been a point of order, yes, Mr.
I didn't
Fang.
say that in fairness. I said sometimes, as you know, things get worse. I didn't say in this particular case.
In light of the minister's answer that sometimes things get worse before they get better, Mr. Dent, is it going to continue to deteriorate? It's deteriorated every month this year that it's been reported. Our return to work rates going to continue to get worse before they get better?
It's ironic, isn't it? Mr. Shoebridge, I can't necessarily predict that. Short to say, there are two things worth noting. One, of course, the impact of COVID on people being able to be at work, no doubt has had an impact and has complicated return to work, particularly at the 4-week level. The detail around that, some of which I'll leave for iCare, so there's no doubt there's an impact there. Further though, I've made really clear, my view is I would expect iCare to be working in a way that would mitigate any further reduction in return to work rates. We don't want them to get any worse at all. I don't accept that they should, save for the fact that obviously COVID has had a huge impact over the course of this year. I don't think that can be ignored. And the work now underway, both in terms of IPS improvement plan and other work we're doing with employers, is all targeted at trying to improve that. So I don't necessarily think it's going to get worse, but some of those factors are obviously out of our control as a regulator.
How much has this cost the scheme this year? The collapse in return to work rates. What's been the cost of it? You must have a handle on that.
I don't have that to hand, Mr. Chair. I'm just having to take that number off notice.
You must have looked at it, because the report that was published and deleted that was accurate but not nuanced indicated that there was a high risk to customers in the scheme due to the poor performance results. So you must have done some costing, Mr. Dent, have you?
Mr. Shoebridge, that's the level of robustness I would have wanted to see before I'd authorised that report to be published. I didn't have the opportunity to do that, which is why I withdrew the report.
Well, but have you done it since? I mean, these numbers are alarming to me. It's not my full-time job to look after this scheme. It must be extremely alarming to you because it's your full-time job.
Expert.
So,
he's expert here.
That insight. That report was published on the 5th of October.
Yep.
I have asked for that work to be done.
So what has been the cost of this to the scheme of the collapse in return to work rates?
As I said, Mr. Shoebridge, I'll take that on notice. I don't have that to hand.
How many workers does it mean have not been returned to work that would have been returned to work had the return to work rates not collapsed in the last 12 months?
I believe you've already asked that question, Mr. Shoebridge, and that was taken on notice.
Mr. Dent.
And that was taken on notice.
All right, order.
Mr. Shoebridge, you did ask that question, and I agreed to take that on notice.
Minister, the cost to the scheme of COVID is difficult to estimate. Would that be a fair summation?
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Because the costings that were provided to you, as I understand, that were provided by CIRA about the presumptive legislation that went in last year, the costing was said to be anywhere between 2,923 million and 8,626 million. So between 2.9 billion and 8.6 billion for the presumptive legislation that went through last year. Do you remember getting those figures?
Oh, broadly, yes.
Yep. Do you know what the actual cost was in the first 12 months of the...
No, Mr. Dent might know.
Mr. Dent? So the legislation...
Total payments.
Yep, under the... under the presumptive legislation, or... So
So those initial estimates for your estimate, that was around 8.6 billion at the upper estimate by the actuaries. And of course, so little was known about COVID, about vaccines, about the impacts at that point in time. The total payments in COVID-related claims as at the 31st of August are 7.8 million, with an expected gross cost being 15.6 million.
So the estimate was 8.6 billion, and the amount paid...
Yes.
And the amount paid was 7.8 million. So only out by a factor of 1,000. Only out by a factor of 1,000. Minister, what do you make of actuarial assumptions that are out by a factor of 1,000? Not 2, not 5, but 1,000.
Many reports and modelling from health, not just here in New South Wales, but all around the world in relation to the pandemic. And I think, the experts that try to do the modelling do their best. With the best assumptions they can make. But as you know, Mr. Shoebridge is a seasoned counsel. It's only as good as the assumptions you make.
Minister, to be quite frank, I've never seen an estimate that's out by a factor of 1,000
But I've never seen
that has had the support of the government behind it.
I've lived in a pandemic situation before. You're not that old, Mr. Shoebridge.
Minister, have you had other actuarial assessments from CIRA that have been out by a factor of 1,000 or even close to it? I mean, it's just incomprehensible.
That pandemic or
at any time?
I've seen. That's such a broad question.
Ever in your entire life?
My entire life, have I ever seen estimates out by 1,000?
Or does it only happen in workers' comp?
I think there's a peculiarity in relation to workers' comp and personal injury that I've experienced over the years where the actuaries tend to be either hyper-conservative or hyper-aggressive. There seems to be very large swings.
So, Mr. Dent, the previous assessment was somewhere between 2.9 billion and 8.6 billion, ended up being 7.8 million. the current estimate is what for COVID-related claims? Now, I'm just going to then work out what 1,000 times that is.
So the scenario currently used for the impact of COVID at this stage is, after we open up the economy, is 638 million. That is based on an 80% vaccination take-up of those over 16 plus, which was the modelling used by the Doherty Institute. So the actuaries are able to extrapolate from the Doherty modelling to those numbers. Now, we already know in New South Wales the rate for vaccination uptake is greater than 80% at 12 plus. So that means there's a degree of sensitivity that you would sensibly apply that 638 million.
So it could be anywhere, using the out by a factor of 1,000, anywhere between 600,000 and 63 billion. Is that what your actuaries are telling you now?
Well, I'm not an actuary, Mr. Shoebridge. What they're telling me is they think that an 80% vaccination rate of a population over 16, extrapolated from the Doherty modelling, the number would be around 638 million.
Minister, you've seen the previous actuarial assessments. Is it the same actuary that's providing this assessment of 638 million?
I don't know.
Mr. Dent? Same actuary?
It is the same actuary.
Minister, do you have any confidence at all on that figure, given they were out by a factor of 1,000 last time?
Again, they are experts that we need to look at the assumptions that were made at the time. Even the Doherty modelling.
You could blindfold yourself and throw dart at a pinboard and you'd get a more accurate figure, wouldn't you?
Okay. Order. Mr. Shoebridge's time has expired.
Big dartboard, though.
I will just hear the point of order since it has been made. Mr. Fang?
Chair, the Minister is trying to provide a very detailed and sensible answer. And, well, now I'm going to raise 2 points of order, as I did yesterday, and Mr. Graham is well aware of this.
Don't respond to interjections, Wes.
So the first point of order...
Okay, order.
The first point of order is that the Minister is trying to provide a very reasonable, sensible answer, and Mr. Shoebridge constantly interjecting and providing commentary on that answer is not helpful for the rest of the committee.
Thank you.
Second point of order is that the Honourable Daniel Mookie should know better than to try and interject while I'm trying to raise a point of order, and I'd ask you to call him to order.
Okay, thank you. So on the first point of order, if we could try and keep the question answer going in a nice way, that would be good. And in the second point of order, if we could not interject during a point of order being taken, that would be very helpful. Mr. Banasiak now has 5 minutes.
Thank you.
I'm behaving today.
Thank you. Minister, just picking up on answers given to Labor's questioning about the QR code check-ins, you said 10 million check-ins per day.
That's what Mr. Rees said,
Yes.
approximately.
Yeah. Is that considered a high level of compliance?
32 media hits.
Well, how are you measuring the level of compliance?
Against, I'm not...
Well, what are you measuring? That 10 million check-ins, how are you comparing that against the people that pretend to check in and just wave their phone across the road? And how are you measuring it against the people that use the well-known fake website? Like how are you measuring that 10 million as saying that's high-level compliance?
Yeah, it's a great question. Fortunately, in this case, because we've never done this before, obviously, we only introduced the QR system when Alpha broke out. But because we've got a baseline through Alpha, we can see how we're faring against that. From Mr. Rees can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there is more QR check-ins now under this wave in Delta than there was under Alpha.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good question. It's hard to, there's not a lot of data that would indicate, that would give us a view of what complete compliance would look like. Certainly the level of check-in activity that we have at the moment is materially higher than we've seen at any other point in the pandemic, and it is consistent at that 10 million level. So we are seeing that sustained over a period of time.
Are you attributing that uptake in check-ins because of the fact that you now have attached a vaccination passport to the process, and obviously businesses are more mindful of having to check the vaccination passport component rather than the actual QR check-in itself?
I think a couple of things. I mean, it's just speculation, but certainly anecdotally we can see very strong compliance and practices across industry at the moment. What we are seeing is about 2 million customers have chosen to put their vaccination certificate into the Service New South Wales app, and we've had over 30 million check-ins done by those customers since they added the certificate. So we are seeing that it's an adopted part of the experience, and it is making that experience more seamless and quick and easy for those customers who have elected to adopt it.
Okay, can I go to the issue of Service New South Wales accounts and more particularly the issue of duplicate Service New South Wales accounts, where people have set up a Service New South Wales account, which has then incurred an error, and then they've been instructed by you to set up a new one under a different email account, and then there's been this issue where no one can actually deactivate that problematic original account. How many instances or reported instances do we have of that across the state?
So there's two pieces there. So you can create multiple accounts to start with. As the level of assurance on those accounts increases in line with what you're trying to do, then we force uniqueness on those accounts. But for very low value, low risk transactions, we do provide that flexibility for customers. We are seeing some reports of customers' accounts being locked. We're looking at whether there's any aspects of that experience that we can fix or improve. And we are aware that at the moment, if you go into our service centres and you need your account unlocked, the experience can take longer than desired. At the moment, our service centres will ring through to our contact centre to facilitate that unlocking. Over the next week or so, we're going to pilot having service centre staff have the systems and the accesses that they need to unlock custom accounts on the spot. And if that's successful, and if we're comfortable that we can do that in a way that's appropriate from a privacy perspective and a risk perspective, then we'll make that change across the network.
Okay. Well, I'll just read you one of many correspondence I've got on this issue. They say, I installed the app ASAP, but was never able to scan the QR code. I contacted Service New South Wales and told there was a problem. Lots of accounts have this issue. They issued me a second account using a different email. Then I was able to scan in with this second account. However, I was not able to link my driver's licence, Dine and Discover vouchers, as it said it was already linked to the first account. I went in and tried to deactivate that first account, couldn't do it. Went to Service New South Wales. They said they couldn't deactivate that second account. This is not just one, person telling me this is multiple. So it's not a case of, purposely setting up, duplicate accounts. This is a person that's tried to do the right thing, and has essentially now caught in this situation where the Service New South Wales app is useless.
Yeah, so and we certainly are hearing that feedback from a small percentage of our customers, and we're very much focused on it. If there's any friction in that experience, our goal will be to take that out as quickly as we can.
Okay. Can I just add to that, Mr. Benazek? And I understand what you're saying, and if there is any individual person that has a problem, please refer them to us so we can see what we can do. But we've had, I think it's based on the data at the moment, 7.39 million people are using, customers are using the Service New South Wales app for check-ins. Now, but that's obviously includes visitors from interstate, for example. So, that, as Mr. Rees said, we don't require them to have the same level of assurance as somebody, for example, in New South Wales that wants to get access to Dine and Discover vouchers, where we're giving taxpayer money to people that live in New South Wales. So every other app in every other state and territory, to the best of my knowledge, is more of the, how shall I phrase it, the garden variety, where you're not required to provide that level of assurance. And that's why the service one in New South Wales stands really above every other app in the country.
Opposition.
Great.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I might turn to this issue. The 8-month Royal Commission in Victoria into Crown has now concluded, findings yesterday. What implications does that now have for Crown in Sydney?
Oh, well, look, obviously they are serious findings and in many ways reinforce what Justice Bergen concluded when she handed down her report. We are looking at that, and obviously, we will be guided by independent liquor and gaming in terms of whether there are further things that we need to do following those recommendations. And I hasten to add, whatever comes out of Western Australia as well, to make sure that we get to a consistent position across the country. Like, as you might recall, Mr. Graham, one of the torments of Justice Bergen was that there were so many different systems doing their own thing. And, we can go out and lead the field, but then if Victoria do something and then WA do something and we're not coordinating with AUSTRAC.
So what does that mean for when Crown might start operating in New South Wales?
My understanding is, I think it was towards, do you recall? I'll take that on notice. Mr. Crawford's on the line.
I'll turn to Mr. Crawford.
I'll
turn to Mr. Crawford in a minute. Just one more question to you, Minister, and then I might put those issues to Mr. Crawford. One of the recommendations of that Royal Commission is that a special manager be appointed for the period, I think, of 2 years to work with a public company, with Crown. Is that one of the considerations that the government might look at in New South Wales, or is that off the table?
Well, again, it's probably best initially directed at Mr. Crawford. We will receive advice, but the report is literally about, 40 hours, less than 40
Mr.
hours
Crawford,
old.
we might turn to you on those three issues. If you could give us any background on your view or any information you think would be of useful to the public.
I don't have any view at the moment on the Finkelstein findings. Spent all afternoon today getting through it. I didn't have a chance yesterday. From the steps I've seen, I think it's clear that a lot of the heavy lifting regarding Crown's conduct was done by Bergen. Although I think the Finkelstein inquiry was something 3 times as big in terms of volume of documents that you've looked at. But we'll spend the next little while. I have a meeting with the Crown board this evening at 6:30. So there'll be interesting debates. I'll be introduced to the new chairman-elect, Mr. Switkowski, certainly, and very active and ongoing dialogue with them.
And Mr. Crawford, any view on what this means for the timing of a decision for Crown from your point of view?
Look, I don't think the Finkelstein findings have much influence at all. We've got our own agenda. We have Kroll and Co. appointed as the independent monitor, and until they are satisfied on a number of issues, Crown will not be getting the go-ahead to open the gaming operations in New South Wales.
Right, thank you for those answers. Minister, I might turn to an issue I raised with you the last time you appeared at Estimates, which was about the Crown compensation clauses, which became public around the 18th of September 2020. That's when they first came to public attention, and they're the 10.5 times compensation clauses for any action the government takes. When I asked you about it, you were clear that this had happened early in the government, February 2012. You said this, no, I cannot give any background. No, I cannot. As I said, I was a minister of the government at the time, but I was not the minister with primary responsibility. It's all beyond my scope. I asked if you were aware of any other deeds or arrangements where 10.5 times compensation was being offered. No, I'm not aware of the specifics. Do similar arrangements apply to the Star? I'm not aware. Minister, is there anything you want to add to that evidence you gave last time?
Other than, I think I also said, Mr. Graham, that I don't think those clauses will stand up in light of Bergen's findings. And I maintain my view. Again, I practiced litigation for 15 years, so take it with a pinch of salt, but that's my strong view based on the findings of Bergen. But again, I have nothing further to add.
Yeah, Minister, you also said this. I asked you, can you give us any other examples where this applies? Not to my knowledge, no. Can you? And then you took that on notice. Minister, you signed off on the State Star financial deed in May last year that includes the same 10.5 compensation principles for the Star. I asked you directly about the Star, and you had no knowledge of it then. You signed this deed.
The deed was, I'll take that on notice, but that deed, was that the first deed?
This is on the 29th of May 2020.
Yep.
The deed you signed off, your signatures here on the deed.
Yeah.
It contains the same provisions that Crown has. If the government takes any action, Star, in this case, gets 10.5 times the compensation for any earnings loss.
Yeah, I'll take that on notice.
Well, you took it on notice last time. In fact, you said you knew of no other examples. The year before, you had signed off an agreement.
Yeah. I'll take it on notice. As I said, like, there are obviously two players in the market, and Mr. Crawford might be able to give more light on this, but there's obviously two players in the market, and you would think that the arrangements would be similar. But again, in relation to your primary question, given Bergen's findings, I cannot find...
Well, my primary question last time was, does Star have the same compensation? And you said you had no idea, nothing to do with me. You signed the deed.
Oh, well, again, I'll take that on notice, but I'm happy for Mr. Crawford to shed some light on it.
Well, let me ask you this, Minister.
I'm not trying to...
The other thing you declined to do was defend the terms of the compensation last time. You were not particularly keen to defend that. Given you signed this deed...
Defend it or offend it?
Defend the terms of the deed, the 10.5 times compensation. Given you signed this deed, given that it seems... I mean, this seems... You know, it seems like quite extraordinary compensation. It's not available to other ordinary businesses.
Yep.
It's certainly, if the state comes along and takes your house, you're compensated for that at the value of your house. If a business is impacted, say by the Metro, that's many businesses are experiencing that. They won't have these provisions.
Where's the question?
Will you defend these compensation terms as being reasonable?
Well, again, I need to have a look at the arrangement. I need to have a look at... Wait a second. Before...
Are you saying you didn't look at the arrangement when
Point
you
of
signed
order.
it?
Point of order. No, point of order.
You signed these.
Okay,
No,
John,
don't.
Order. All right, order. I will hear the point of order.
Chair. The Honourable John Graham, after having quite a lengthy introduction, shall we say, to the question, finally did ask a question. Then the Minister was attempting to answer the question when the Honourable John Graham starts to intercede with what I would best describe as a rant. Now, this is not how estimates is to run.
Okay.
And I think that the Honourable John Graham should know better, and I'd ask you again to call him to order.
Thank you, Mr. Fang. Mr. Graham, if we could proceed in a way that allows the Minister to answer the question, that would be appreciated.
Minister, you signed these compensation provisions into law.
Yes.
I'm surprised you need to think about it.
Yeah.
Why did you, when you signed them,
Yes.
Why did you believe they were defensible?
Well, because, Mr. Graham, I'm not Eddie Obeid or Ian MacDonald and sign things without advice or contrary to advice. So what we do on our side is we rely on advice, and in this case, it was Treasury.
Well, why won't you defend that?
Let the Minister finish. Listen, if you want the theatre, sure, we can have we can have a stoush and we can do a dance if you want. But I'm just trying to give you the answer.
It's not theatre.
Well, it is when you.
Well, it's a serious question.
Yeah, I know.
Well, then let
you're
him
such
have
a nice guy. You don't have to deceive me.
All right, order.
It's a false facade.
Greetings, Minister. Good to see you.
I'm Mr. Mookie.
How are you?
You're the one. Were you the one that injected before that said you knew the answer?
I did. And look, if you wish to refer any of my questions for me to answer, you just let me know, Minister. I'm happy to answer the questions on your behalf.
Front of the class, it always.
Thank you, Minister. Firstly, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Through you, do you mind if I just direct some questions to Mr. Dent? And of course, reserve your right to intervene at any time you so wish.
No, thank you, Mr. Mookie.
That's fine. Firstly, Mr. Dent, congratulations on your selection as the new CEO of the State Insurance Regulatory Authority. Mr. Dent, have you received the nominal insurer liability valuation as of 30 June 2021 from iCare?
No, I'm not. We're expecting to receive it fairly shortly.
Why have you not received it?
I can't answer that. I know that takes some time to come to us. We normally expect it in October. It's still October, and I'm told it'll apply to us shortly.
Therefore, I presume that you have not issued any advice to Minister Dominello or the Premier Perete's office, or for that matter, then Treasurer Perete's office on the results of the NI liability valuation as of that date?
That's correct.
So when the Premier last week said to the lower house the funding ratio was 99%, did that information come from CIRA?
Not if it was based on the report that I haven't received, Mr. Mickey.
Great. Minister Dominello, did your office provide that advice to the Premier's office?
Oh, I'll take that on though. So
Thank you very much. Mr. Dent, can you advise what the underwriting result for the nominal insurer was for financial year 2021?
That would be in the report I've not yet received, I assume.
The nominal liability valuation doesn't contain that. The annual report does. Have you received iCare's annual report?
He answers his own questions. Good.
Have you received iCare's?
Mirror in the morning.
Well, you're telling me you don't have the underwriting result. This was, I mean, with respect, Mr. Dent, your predecessor had this information. Has it not been received by you, or is it not? You've not got it to hand?
I'll follow that up. If it has been received, it's not currently to hand.
Okay, so you're in no position of being able to advise us either, therefore, what the net result was?
I'll come back to you later if I can.
And I presume you don't know. Okay, so the last available funding ratio we have is a nominal liability valuation as of date 31 of December 2020, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I just now formally table the documents, which I've tabled anyway. I believe, Mr. Dent, that they've been emailed to you. A copy has been available to you, Minister. These are publicly available documents. They are the last two available NI valuations. Mr. Dent, do you have these documents by any chance?
I do have them emailed to me, yes.
Great, thank you. Can I just take your attention to tender 001, which is the last available NI valuation as of 31 December 2020. Do you see that?
Give me a moment. Where are you referring to?
That's okay. It's just I'm making sure that you have the document that's called Tender 001, which is formally called Nominal Insurer Liability Valuation as of 31 December 2020. Do you have that?
These two at least.
I have that PDF in front of me.
Great, thank you. You have the next one too, which is Tender 002, which is the exact same valuation, but for the period ending 30 June 2020. You see that?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, you see that between these two valuations, it shows that the funding ratio deteriorated from 98.5% to 98%, which is on, I think it's page 4 and 5. But are you prepared to take my word that that's what that document says?
I am at this point, Mr. Mook. There's no reason not to.
Thank you. But you see, we're not really comparing apples and apples, are we? iCare changed their accounting assumptions between those two reports. That's correct, isn't it?
So the assumptions, I believe, have been changed to include the recommendations from the McDougall report, which then reflects the APRA probability of accuracy of 75%.
Yeah, when you say, Mr. Dent, when you say that it was made to reflect the McDougall recommendations, I've got all of them. And I can't see a single recommendation in which they make that. Which one are you referring to?
There was a copy of which I can't remember the exact recommendation now, Mr. Mookie, but reflecting the use of an economic funding ratio.
That's a separate matter. I'm asking you about the accounting ratio. The change of assumptions for the calculation of the accounting ratio is what I'm asking you about. It's the case, is it not, that, and from the point that iCare was originated, iCare has always reported its results using an 80% probability of sufficiency and a 15.6% risk margin, which I'm sure the nerds here will appreciate. That's correct, isn't it?
That's boring,
Yeah, but now they're reporting it on a 75% probability of accuracy and an 11.7% risk margin. That's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah, but is it not the case that as a result of this change in accounting assumptions, the scheme's deficit would have been $1 billion if it was still reported in the usual way, as opposed to the deficit, which is now $382 million. That's correct?
I'll take your word for that, Mr.
So the change of accounting assumptions that iCare decided resulted in them effectively getting a $18 million boost to their bottom line. Is that fair?
Again, without sitting there with a calculator myself, that sounds correct.
Did CIRA give its permission to iCare to change its accounting assumptions?
That's not something CIRA directs iCare on.
Were you advised?
if we were before my time, that change occurred, Mr. Mookie, before my appointment.
Can you take that on notice as to whether or not iCare gave Sierra any notice that it was intending to change its accounting assumptions?
I'm happy to take that on notice.
Can you also, I'll be kind to you, Mr. Dent, do you mind also taking a notice what specific recommendation you say from McDougall gave right to them to change how they calculate the funding ratio using the accounting assumptions?
I will, and I'll note that if recommendation 42 isn't the correct one, I'll apologise to you now, Mr. McKee, but note that APRA used a 75% probability back.
I'm aware.
And that may have been the case rather than McDougall.
Mr. Dent, but the reason I'm asking you this is because I've listened to 3 iCare CFOs and CEOs explain to me the virtues of an 80% probability of adequacy and how they swear that that is the one we should be using. And then all of a sudden it's changed and it's resulted in them having a net benefit of $618 million. I'm a bit cynical, forgive me. Minister, were you advised that iCare was changing its accounting assumptions?
No, not to my knowledge. We're happy to take that on notice.
Regardless, though, Minister, even with iCare's more generous change, the scheme is going backwards. Do you accept that?
Yes.
And Mr. Shoebridge covered some of this, so I won't repeat it, but you accept that this is predominantly as a result of falling return to work rates?
Yes.
Yes. I just want to pick up on one of the points you made, Mr. Dent, to Mr. Shoebridge. You said that this fall in return to work rates was attributable to COVID. What did you mean by that?
Not entirely attributable, Mr. McKee. I think that's probably a overstatement. The impact of COVID has complicated the ability for people to return to work. iCare have advised me that that's a factor that is currently at play, and I think I'd suggest that that doesn't sound totally unreasonable with 3.5 months of stay-at-home orders that was certainly impacted. Now, that said, I don't accept that that's the only reason why return to work is slipping. We're seeing that over a much longer period of time, and we're seeing it in other jurisdictions. So there's a range of factors at play, both in terms of employers and their obligations and insurers. However, it would be difficult to pretend that COVID wasn't a contributing factor at the present moment.
Well, I find that, and look, I accept that that might be the reasoning that's been given to you, Mr. Dent. So don't take this as necessarily as a criticism of CIRA. But the problem that I have with that is that this report, 10-1, the last available valuation report, actually says that basically iCare was too conservative in estimating the impact of COVID and that they released $76 million. They decreased the outstanding liability by $76 million because actually COVID had far less of an impact than they thought. So was iCare being, again, a little too conservative when it came to that assumption that this was COVID related?
I don't think I can answer that.
Sure. But then equally... Go ahead, Mr. Dent.
Just for clarity, I'm absolutely clear that falling return to work rates are not something CIRA is happy with at all. And so just for the purpose of clarity, I'm not happy about it at all.
Well,
we are expecting iCare to do their bit to improve.
To be fair, Mr. Dent, if you were to sort of suggest that you were happy with it, you'd probably get more questions. But I accept your point that you're not happy with it. But the issue is that the decline in return to work rates between 60... the NI between 66% as of December 2020 and 63% as of July 2021, that didn't cover at all the impact of the lockdown. That's fair?
I agree.
So we can assume that with the lockdown, these numbers are going to sharply deteriorate. Is that a fair assumption?
I would expect so.
Yeah, fair enough. Equally, at the same time, self-insurers were at 70% in December 2020, and they're still at 70% in July 2020. That's what your dashboard says. Does that accord with your memory?
That is correct. There is no doubt that the NI does not perform as well as self and specialised insurers when you look at those numbers.
Well, that's true, and that's been true for a while. But the problem is that their deterioration relative to self-insurers is getting worse. That's fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, thank you. Can we, Minister... actually, no, I'll go to Mr. Dent first on this. Oh, shall I one?
You knew half the answers.
Saved by the bell.
Yeah, no, he did.
Nearly all the answers you had.
Do a test on his own questions. Minister, I wanted to ask you about an issue that my office has received quite a bit of complaints about from people who have suppressed ABNs. This is something that we have been dealing with for the last 3 months. We have used every avenue we can think of, including trying to ask questions in the chamber, which I believe you may be aware of. So these people have spent, over 3 months trying to access the micro grants program with their suppressed ABNs. We were told that this was fixed a couple of weeks ago, but now we're being told actually it's not, and that these people are still being asked for personal details in order to get their micro grants application. Are you able to cast any light on that or tell us what's going on?
No, Mr. Rees will be able to.
What does suppressed mean?
Sorry, suppressed ABN is, for example, if you're a victim of domestic violence, you want to have your personal details not out there for everyone to see.
Yes, thank you for the question. So we have a manual process in place to help customers with suppressed APNs to apply for the microgrant programs. At the moment, we've had 5 customers complete that process, but certainly any customers that have a suppressed ABN that are still struggling, we would ask them to reach out to us, and we'll help those customers to get the grant and ensure that's back paid appropriately to the start of their impact.
That's comforting to know that it will be back paid. I have a constituent email here from the 20th of October, so not very long ago, last Wednesday, saying that when they tried to apply through that sort of manual workaround process, they were asked for their address and that a PO box was not acceptable. And then they were told that they would need to go and show their ID at their local service, New South Wales, and also told that the people who they would be showing their ID to would not necessarily understand that a suppressed ABN came with a certain degree of privacy. Clearly that's unacceptable and not a workaround for people with suppressed ABNs.
So because of the suppressed ABN, those customers aren't going to be able to apply through the digital process. We are going to need that additional step, visiting the service centre as part of proving identity. But we'll certainly look at whether that's asking for information that it shouldn't be, and whether it's doing everything we need to do to protect the privacy of those impacted individuals.
Thank you, because this information is very concerning for those people who, have very real privacy concerns. Also, I understand that there is a suppressed ABN department within the ATO. Has there been any interaction between Service New South Wales and suppressed ABN department instead? Because that would be a really easy way to verify those suppressed ABNs.
I need to take that on notice, I'm not sure.
Thank you. If you could treat that as a priority, it would be very much appreciated, because it's causing a significant amount of distress to these people. I just wanted to quickly ask you, the Mining Subsidence Board, sorry, I've forgotten the exact name of it now, is that your responsibility, Minister Dominello, or is that under Minister Anderson? I know they're a department and agency of the Customer Service Department.
Ms Webb's on the line. She can respond to any questions you have.
Thank you. That would be very useful.
I can confirm that it's Minister Anderson's portfolio, so...
Okay.
I used to
the
have
question
it,
will be this afternoon.
Yeah, that'd be great. I will take it.
Again this afternoon.
Excellent. I will take it up with you then. Thank you. I'll just hand over to my colleague, Ms Fairman, for the rest of this time.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, good morning. Do you believe that your government's gambling harm minimisation policies are effective and resulting in a reduction in gambling harm?
Oh, I think there's always more to do. There's no doubt about that.
So are you aware that tax revenue from poker machines increased by 38% from $1.3 billion in 2019-20 to $1.8 billion in 2020-2021?
Not precise figures, but I knew there was a significant increase.
So that probably suggests that if poker machine revenue is increasing, gambling harm is also increasing. Would you agree?
I think it's a fair assumption that if revenues are increasing, that unless there's a strong mitigant, then the harm would increase. Yeah.
I just wanted to go to the budget papers, which from 2019 to 20 to 2024 to 25, you assume, or the state budget assumes, that gambling tax revenue from pubs and clubs will in fact increase by 62%. To $2.19 billion. Are you aware of that?
Yeah,
was that an assumption that you made as Minister, your department, the Treasurer? Where did that assumption come from?
I think I think it came from Treasury. It definitely wasn't me. I don't make these figures up, but I think it came from Treasury. I can take that on notice if you want.
Okay, thank you. That would be good. So would that indicate, therefore, that your government assumes that any measures that it's taking to reduce gambling harms from poker machines will not work and, in fact, be counterproductive if, in fact, you're assuming, I think, over a 4-year period, the gambling tax revenue to increase by 62% from poker machines? In pubs and clubs?
Not necessarily, but it's a fair assumption that unless there are strong mitigants in play, that if there is going to be an increase in revenue, there will be an increased exposure at the lower end to people at harm. I don't cavil with that proposition.
So, what conversations you have, does it concern you that there is a 62% increase factored into the state budget, a 62% increase in poker machine gambling, if in fact we know that there is a certain percentage of people who are gambling, who are in fact, it's, as you know, wrecking lives and, essentially kind of killing some people?
Yeah, it's deeply concerning that there is significant harm caused to people, certain people, that have a gambling addiction. There's no doubt about that. However, let me add, gambling is not unlawful. So if people have the resources and they've got the personal control and the wherewithal to gamble, that's their call, because that's lawful in our country. However, we need to absolutely take steps to ensure that those that are at risk to harm are protected, and that's why I've been advocating for the cashless trial, but for COVID, that would have commenced already in Newcastle West.
So are you aware that there has been a similar, or do you know actually, I don't know whether there has been, this is a genuine request for information, that there was the sharp increase in gambling of 19% after the 2020 lockdown compared to the same month in 2019. Do you know whether we are seeing a similar uptick in gambling since we reopened in October?
Do
you have that information?
No, but somebody
Rose may.
Yeah, Miss Webb may
sure.
know.
So I think we're not in the position of having any official figures so far, but anecdotally, the inspectors have been out and about in the past few weeks, and we have seen quite an uptick in gambling activity. So the anecdotal information would suggest similar to last time.
Okay, so just back to this this 62% increase then that the state budget is assuming is going to come in, 62% increase on gambling tax revenue over the forward estimates. So a recent report, in fact, it was released this week by Gambling Research Australia. This found that the incidence of gambling has actually fallen from 2/3 of Australians to just over half, but the incidence of problem gambling has doubled. So does that suggest that your government's projections of this revenue is actually based on a growing cohort of problem gamblers? Wouldn't that suggest that that is what you are risking?
Again, I accept the proposition that there is a real issue in the community in relation to problem gambling. It's not it's not a micro percentage. There's a real cohort of people that are, whose lives have been devastated. And it's not just their lives. I remember watching a Sky News report where Graham Richardson said it happened to his family, and he couldn't go on holidays because his dad wasted all the money in pokies. And then a number of the other commentators said the same thing. I was blown away at how broad the impact was, and I know that both sides of politics, all sides of politics, have to do more in this space. There's no doubt in my mind about that, and I really believe, and that's why Justice Bergen called it that cashless gaming, because it provides oversight, will go a long way to fixing the twin evils of problem gambling and money laundering.
Okay, so Minister, do you see yourself as you are the Minister to reduce gambling harm in New South Wales?
I've got a responsibility for that.
So you're talking about this gambling card that is yet to be introduced. I know you're working hard on it, but at the same time, the state budget is assuming that gambling tax revenue from pubs and clubs will increase by 62% over the forward estimate. So how are you justifying that as the Minister to reduce gambling harm, that the state budget is relying so much on an increase in people using poker machines, and the research is showing that there's an increasing number of people who are having problems with that? And you know what that means. That means, as you've just said, wrecked lives, not being able to pay their mortgage, wrecked relationships. It's the question I have already posed at Wes.
We hope the Treasury's wrong.
What?
We hope the Treasury gets it wrong. The gambling isn't that bad.
I don't think I directed it to you, Mr. Shane Mallard, to the Minister.
Sorry, what was the question?
How do you justify, as the Minister who is responsible for reducing gambling harm, that there is such an increase in projections of the use of poker machines over the forward estimates?
Well, again, Ms. Verman, I did not introduce poker machines. You can ask Mr. Carr about that. But the reality is gambling is lawful. And that's fine, and that's great. That's for people that enjoy a punt, that's good. But for those that struggle with it and cause really deep problems, that's deeply disturbing. And there's things that we have to do. So, as you know, the projections are anywhere between, you hear some people say it's only 1%, some people say it's 10% of gamblers. Whatever the figure is, it's not insignificant.
Especially if you consider half of all Australians will gamble at some point.
I accept the proposition, and I'm not walking away from it, not by any stretch. But and that's why I've been advocating for a cashless solution, because that way you have more visibility and therefore can help those that put their hand up and are seeking help. But if people are in the shadows, it's very hard to help them. But if people say, look, I need some assistance, and that's why, look, to the credit of Newcastle West, they put their hand up and said they want to be part of the trial. And again, it would have already been underway, but for the COVID restrictions. But hopefully we can start them again soon.
Okay, so let's get to the progress on that then. You're talking about trials. I'm particularly interested in also, you had the exposure draft of the gambling harm minimisation bill. Where is all that up to? When can we expect to see that come to Parliament?
Yeah, it's not too far away, Ms. Fairman. We were waiting to see, in fairness, what was going to happen in Victoria, and we've seen that now. And because that's, again, based on what Justice Bergen said, we don't want to have three different systems, because that's just going to force people on the border of New South Wales to go to Victoria or vice versa. That's not a good outcome as well. So, it is not far away. I can't say any more than that.
So that's good. So with the Victorian Royal Commission's recommendations around kind of things like implementing pre-commitment, like on a card, implementing time limits, for example, no player can play for more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period, which, to be honest, is, to me, just completely shocked me when I heard or thought of somebody just going in and sitting down and playing a poker machine for 12, if not longer, hours. And things like if they gamble for 12 hours, they must then take a 24-hour break. These are some of the recommendations from the Victorian Royal Commission into the Crown. Are they the type of recommendations that you are saying you will also implement so that we have this across-the-board scheme, national scheme? Is that correct?
No, I'm saying that we need to obviously read the report, and the ink is literally drying on that report. and it's something we would need to take into account. Obviously, we got great advice from Mr. Crawford that would feed into that, and the Office of Responsible Gambling would feed into that. But yeah, there's no doubt. The Western Australian Commission is more about the regulator, whereas we always knew that Victoria was looking at, more aligned to Bergen. That's why I wanted to hold off until I saw that.
Okay, thank you. And now 5 minutes for Mr. Justin Field.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Good to see you today. I just wanted to pick up from where Mr. Graham was going earlier. This compensation agreement with the Star that you signed in 2020, I think you got cut off at the end of your last answer. Did you indicate that you had Treasury advice that you were relying on in that agreement? It was coming from Treasury.
I do, absolutely. I don't sign off on these things. Like in the sense, I sign off, but I don't. I'm not in the middle of
I'm sure you got advice. I'm just confirming it was Treasury advice, not from your department. Treasury advice.
Yeah, that's to the best of my recollection.
Is that advice available publicly?
I'm not sure I can take that on notice.
If you could, that would be great. I just want to...
We learnt a lot from those lab years of what not to do. Yeah, so.
I'd like to talk a bit about how the CMS the CMS is working. I've been asking some questions of you in the Parliament, as well as on notice about the CMS, the algorithm, this new methodology for identifying suspicious transactions. In answers last week in Parliament, Minister Tudor-Hope made clear that from the start of 2020, Liquor and Gaming had enhanced its analytical methodology to identify suspicious transactions in electronic gaming machines. That's led to some being identified, and you're engaging with the authorities on that. Can you give me an indication about how many suspicious transactions the system has identified?
No, I can't. I'm happy to take that on notice, but...
That would be great. I'm not sure if Ms Webb or yourself can indicate how many referrals have been made to policing authorities.
Yeah, again, if you don't mind, I'll take that on notice.
No worries. Can I just confirm that the CMS is also connected to the poker machines at the Star Casino?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, and the analytical, Ms Webb,
sorry,
it looked like you might have wanted to add something there.
I just wanted to clarify, they have a similar system, but it's not actually the SC CMS.
Okay, well that's good to know. Is this enhanced analytical methodology to identify suspicious transactions also in operation for this similar CMS system with the Star Casino's poker machines?
I can answer that, Minister. Yes, we've got the same analytics team working on both.
Okay. Minister, when you took the proposal to allow the Star Casino to lease an extra 1,500 poker machines to Cabinet, were you aware that there had been allegations of $175 million being potentially laundered through the poker machines at the Star Casino by one player, as late as, some of those transactions, as late as 2020?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Ms Webb, do you know if the CMS system had identified any suspicious transactions at the Star since the start of 2020?
I think I'll have to take that on notice. It wasn't a CMS system, just to clarify, but we'll check.
What is the system called, just so I can be more accurate?
Sorry. I would also have to take that on notice. I'm sorry, I'm just not across the detail. I just know it's a different system.
Okay. Were there any concerns, and I guess this is for you, Ms Webb, but also potentially for you, Mr Crawford, were you aware of any allegations or concerns about money laundering through the poker machines at the Star Casino since the start of 2020?
To your last question, the system that the Star have in place is Syncross. I think it's spelled S-Y-N-A-R-O-S. It's slightly different and modern technology than CMS, but operates very similar.
And to the first point of that question, were you or the department aware of any allegations relating to money laundering through poker machines at the Star Casino since the start of 2020?
we didn't have any evidence of that, no, but we have been working with the STAR for some months now. The Syncross system is relatively new, and making sure that we hook up to our system we have access to through the supplementary notice. So that's I raised that with the staff ago. We've got a program in place to get access for them to cooperatively with us. It's quite complex, but we're up and running. We've retained resources to properly analyse the material coming through. So,
Just one to clarify, Mr. Crawford, because I'm about to lose time. You said it was relatively new. When did Syncross start?
I don't know the exact number.
Okay, I'll put that on notice.
Yeah, put me on notice.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. As per the resolution of the House, we will now have a short 15-minute COVID safe break. We'll be back at 11:15.
Don't forget to check out.
From the opposition, Mr. Mookie.
Thank you, Chair, and I personally feel slightly safer, so thank you for the break too.
What are you eating, Mr. Graham?
And
Mr. Graham, what are you eating?
It was the.
I asked the questions here, Minister. I asked the questions here.
Sorry, order.
Please.
Order. The muffin of the day is very, very good from downstairs.
Minister, let's resume our conversation about the state of the state's workers' compensation scheme. I think to you or to Mr. Dent, however you wish to feel, but you agree that the deterioration, I think we agreed earlier that it was alarming. You agree with that?
I think that's reasonable.
Oh, you're here.
I'm
Good
here.
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Totally terrific.
On the screen.
We were asked to have
You've
Mr.
confused
Rees
us.
here before morning tea and
Oh,
Mr.
yes.
Dent here after.
You forgot. You should have left your
I was going
question.
to say your questions.
Either way, you agree it's alarming, yes?
Yes, there is nothing good to come from a return to work rate that's declining, absolutely.
Can you bring your microphone further?
Is that better?
Yes, it is. Are you worried that the deterioration in the return to work rates is putting pressure on the financial sustainability of the scheme?
Yes, it is a significant contributor to the financial sustainability of the scheme.
Would you type that as a red alert warning?
The challenge, Mr. Mookie, particularly as how we've described things as red alerts, is the criteria for those is not yet clear to me, and I don't think is as objective and transparent as I'd like it to be.
Sure.
But certainly, if I was going to pick a colour, it would probably be red. The issue with the scheme sustainability and our risk ratings is there are multiple factors we consider, and our report published but two of those, both of which are significant concerns.
Good. So what are you doing about it?
So first of all, it's probably worth acknowledging I don't prudentially regulate eye care. That's a current challenge. It was acknowledged by Mr. McDougall.
No one does, actually.
That's absolutely correct.
Yes.
So that is a matter for government, and the McDougall report provided, I think, a clear way forward about extending CIRA's powers to allow us to have more capacity to do that. What are we doing about it? Well, we're working as constructively as possible with iCare on their claims management processes. Now, that is complex. I understand that it will take a long time to unravel the situation they're in. As I made clear before, I don't think getting bad before it gets better is a good enough outcome. I think it's already bad. There's no doubt about that. We're also working with employers actively. There's a responsibility for employers to do work on return to work as well. We're seeing in other jurisdictions, and in case you ask, I don't have them to hand at the moment, we're trying to get it, but there is a general decline in return to work rates across other jurisdictions. I'm not suggesting in any way they're as dramatic, but there is a broader trend that we need to be concerned with. So I think there's work to be done for both insurers, employers, and at a scheme level.
I accept this, right, and I accept that you are taking those actions, but the McDougall report reinforced the findings of the Daw report, which is commenced. The Daw report had 21 points of an action plan that was meant to turn it around before it didn't, before we then got the McDougall report. But you are still responsible for implying that 21-point action plan. On notice, can we get an update from you as to where that's up to?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dent, how did your review of Serious Financial iCare's NI FY21 business plan go?
We have just recently provided iCare with feedback. So Ernst & Young provided us the pressure testing that McDougall recommended also be done, and Cumston Sargent did so on behalf of Treasury. I understand that both were reasonably in agreement with each other, and we've now gone back to iCare with a series of recommendations for their business plan to be updated. So that work's underway presently.
In what respect was their business plan deficient enough for you to have to make recommendations for them to rectify?
I'm operating off memory because I haven't had time to turn to the right page. So there were areas where we expected more information to be made available in the business plan to justify a range of the assumptions that are in there. So off the top of my head, that's certainly one of the areas we've asked for clarity on. And I think, again, that was something that was supported by both EY and Cumston Sargent. So I think it was more about strengthening the position in that business plan so that it better articulated how they arrived at a number of the conclusions they have.
Well, when does that business plan say iCare will return to its target funding ratio of above 110%?
I don't have that to hand. I'll have to take that on notice.
When does that business plan say that iCare's underwriting result will be positive?
I don't have that. I'd have to take that on notice. So when the business plan is finalised, I'd be able to answer those questions with certainty.
But this is a business plan for financial year 2020. Well, I'm not even sure it is for financial year 2021.
Maybe for 22.
So you're of the view, it's for the coming year, right? That's not the one.
That's correct. So the request was for it to be pressure tested from McDougall. The business plan arrived a couple of months ago. That work has now been undertaken by both EY for CIRA and Cumston Sargent for Treasury. We've now gone back and we expect the business plan to be finalised very, very shortly.
Is it ICARE's discretion as to whether or not they accept your recommendations?
It is ICARE's business plan. That's a matter for the ICARE board.
I'll take it up with them then. Minister, you said in August that you will be bringing legislation to implement the McDougall recommendations. When are we going to be seeing this legislation?
I'm hoping by the end of this session. Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat? Minister, your microphone.
I'm hoping by the end of the session.
Great, thank you. Mr. Dent, CIRA has only provided 4 weeks consultation for aspects of the McDougall recommendations. I'm talking about commutations, threshold, medical expenses. Why are we only adopting such a limited timeframe?
The aim, of course, was to have legislation introduced in this session, so that obviously didn't provide us an extraordinarily long timeline. That said, the public consultation isn't the only consultation we'll be able to undertake, and we'll certainly take views for as long as we can while developing the advice to government on potential measures. So the public consultation is just one part of an overall process of developing that position.
Well, I've had numerous stakeholders tell me that they need more time, so you probably should give them some
I'd welcome them to provide that advice to me, Mr. Mookie, and we'll...
I'm sure the ones that are watching may well be emailing you soon.
I look forward to receiving it.
I'm sure. Can you update us? Where are you up to on your investigation into collusion between ICARE, Corrections New South Wales and QBE?
That investigation has recently commenced, so the terms of reference have just been, I understand, signed off. If they've not been signed off, they're about to be.
Recently commenced the investigation or prosecution?
Well, the second round, so there's a second round of investigation recommended. I understand from the work undertaken by my predecessor, there was to be a further detailed investigation of claims management for TMF as it related to corrections.
Corrections said that they're not an employer, and your predecessor disagreed with them. Corrections therefore said that as a result of them not being an employer, they're free to collude, was basically the substance of their position. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree that anyone should be free to collude with anybody, to be honest. There is ambiguity around the Section 211B of the Act provides for government employers to be treated as self-insurers. There is ambiguity about what that means. My predecessor took the view that I obviously prefer that a government agency is an employer. We have, from Corrections, had advice they don't agree with that position, and there is legal advice from the Crown Solicitor that also, in a sense, describes that there is ambiguity. So one of the things we would be asking the government to consider going forward after the McDougall recommendations is some clarity around who a government employer is and who represents the Crown in relation to workers' compensation.
Sure. Minister, in terms of one of the questions that's arisen as a result of the COVID impact on the workers' comp scheme, which I'm sure you're across, is the fear that specialist insurers and self-insurers have about what the impact will be on them and whether or not the recovery mechanisms that are provided in legislation will be used. So what is CIRA doing to ensure that the cost of claims are being equally distributed across all scheme participants?
Yeah, we're currently looking at that situation, and I'll have more to say shortly on that, Mr. Mookie.
When you say currently looking into that, do you mean CIRA is currently providing you advice on that matter?
Yes, CIRA is constantly giving us advice in relation to this issue, which, quite frankly, was spawned about 18 months ago when the pandemic hit.
Indeed,
and Mr. Shoebridge has been, to his credit, has been prosecuting the case, but it's a challenge for every jurisdiction.
Yeah, and look, again, I'm not criticising. It's more a case of, given the premium filings that are about to go out for a lot of these specialist insurers.
I know. We are literally monitoring the situation. Hopefully I'll have more to say very, very soon.
Thank you. Mr. Dent, has ICARE started having discussions with CIRA about next year's premiums?
I'd have to take that on notice. I assume so. The supervision team is constantly meeting with ICARE to discuss those things. I understand we didn't reject their more recent filing for a 2.9% increase. I assume those discussions are ongoing.
They indicated to you a desire to increase premiums by more than 2.9% in the next year?
Not formally, no.
And informally?
No, not to me.
And to your team or to CIRA?
Not that I'm aware.
Okay, but you would expect, given the financial pressures that the scheme is, it's more likely than not that premiums will rise than reduce?
I certainly don't expect them to reduce.
Okay. How many, to you, Minister, or to CIRA, how many people have been exited from the scheme under Section 39?
I don't have that available.
I'd need to take that on notice, Mr. Mookie.
I think the last available figures we had was about 6,000. Do we know how many were exited in the last year?
I'm just looking for that. I'm not sure I have that to hand. I can try and get an update on that before we're finished today.
Equally, do you know how many workers have lost access to medical benefits under Section 59?
No, I don't.
Are you getting reports?
I can get an update on that for you. That information is available to CIRA, so I will endeavour to follow that up for you.
Are you getting notifications of workers who are threatening self-harm as a result of termination?
I haven't seen any personally. That's not to suggest that those notifications wouldn't be made available. I expect that they would be.
Can you get some information on that too?
I can endeavour to do that for you.
Thank you, Minister. You said that you'll be establishing a form of a workers' compensation scheme for workers in the gig economy. When will we be seeing that?
I said that we would. I said from memory, Mr. Mookie, that we would go and consult with industry in relation to what we can do, what is best practice, and I will. From memory, I'm just trying to remember where we're up to on that, Mr. Mookie. I'll take it on notice.
Well, I think you actually went on the Wendy and Robbie program and said that you'd be introducing one, and then you'll be consulting as a part of its design. So are we still intending to introduce anything in this space or not?
Mr. Mookie, we have done the consultation, and obviously, as you can imagine, there were some somewhat divided opinions, but we've provided advice to the government now to consider the range of options.
Yeah. The advice has been provided to you. The question is, as a matter of policy, is the government intending to introduce some form of scheme?
I'll take that on notice because, again, I was trying to remember where we're up to. But
Minister, we've had 6 deaths in New South Wales. There's one widow that I've spoken to who currently resides in Indonesia, who is in 6 months into a dispute with Chubb because that's the only available process. Even if she was to succeed in that, at best she can access $150,000. There's another widow that I'm talking to that's currently in China. Same scenario applies. You agree with me that this is unacceptable, that a person can die at work in New South Wales and find themselves and their families facing destitution and a battle with a global multinational in order to get any form of assistance?
Of course, it's not good at all. Of course, it's not.
Equally,
and that's why the New South Wales, that's why the Territorial government was the first one out there to say we're going to try and consult with industry. No,
well, that's not true. But I won't fact. I'm happy to fact check you on that one. If you want to do on that, given that the Victorian government's been on this for 2 years. But I'm not going to disagree with you about the desire to introduce one in New South Wales, Minister. What I'm asking you, given you agree with me that this is unacceptable, when are we going to see action on this?
That's why we're consulting with industry. Like, we don't want to go out there and do something that is contrary to best practice. So we are consulting with industry to work out what is the best way forward. Can I just I need to revise an answer I gave before in relation to the McDougall ledge, inverted commas, that I said by the end of this, it's going to be. I've just been informed it's probably next year now.
So it's going to be close to a year from the point that McDougall before the government brings any legislation in. That correct?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, in that year since, the scheme has deteriorated even further. You agree?
Yes.
So why then the delay?
Well, for starters, we haven't sat for a number of the days.
Well, you're the one who made the release in August saying that legislation is coming, Minister.
Again, sorry.
We'll hear the apologies, Minister. Point of order has been taken. Go ahead.
I understand. I accept the robust questioning, but there comes a point where, the Minister needs to be allowed to finish his answer before Mr. Mookie does his, thing of...
Okay, I think I've heard enough. For the purposes of Hansard, especially, if we could just not talk over each other. Thank you, Mr. Mookie.
Let me rephrase the question so the Minister can provide a direct response. Minister, you're the one who announced this on the 26th of August or thereabouts, that you'd be introducing legislation. You did that in the middle of the lockdown period, well and truly aware of the fact that the House wasn't sitting. So what then is the reason for the delay?
There's a whole lot of other items on the agenda, Mr. Mookie, in terms of, it's not just us, there's Parliamentary Council, there's a whole lot of other things that we need to get into position. It's not just me doing that and, hey presto, as you would appreciate, you've been in this place for a long time. So we are moving as fast as we can, but this thing called Delta has had a significant impact on so many things, including getting legislation through the door.
Minister, can I ask a question through you to the IPART representative?
Yes, please, sir.
Sure. To the person from IPART who is here, can I ask, IPART is responsible for applying a floor and ceiling test to the regulated asset base that is controlled by the Transport Asset Holding Entity. That's correct?
Okay.
I clarify that. We're responsible for administering the rail access undertaking, and that undertaking provides for a floor and ceiling test. Two parties can agree prices between the floor and ceiling test.
And when will IPART be completing its first floor and ceiling test for the regulated asset base of the Transport Asset Holding Entity?
So the Transport Asset Holding Entity has inherited the agreements from Railcorp and also has new access agreements with Sydney Trains and New South Wales Trains. And each year it's required by the 30th of October to give us a report on the previous financial year of compliance with the floor and ceiling test. So we'd expect the first reports of the Sydney Trains and New South Wales Trains access agreements to be provided to us by the end of October next year.
Last question, Adam. And how long will it take you to then apply the test? When will you think you'll be issuing your draft determination under that process?
Just to clarify, we don't make a determination.
Well, sure.
We just assess whether whether Tahi has complied with its obligation and it hasn't, for example, overcharged
or undercharged.
The ceiling test. It normally doesn't take us that long. To be frank, historically, Railcorp usually provided its annual compliance report late, and we're hopeful that Tahi will provide it by the end of October next year, and once we have it, it's not depending that they provide us
October next year. It's October next year, not October this year.
For the prior financial year, because the access agreements have only applied from 1
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Minister, there seems to be a backlog in Service New South Wales resuming the provision of licence testing and rider testing. I've had a couple of constituency matters referred to me by the member for Maitland. She's got a constituent who's a teenager. He needs his licence for his employment. He can't even book a test. He's just been told you've got to keep coming. He's got a letter from his employer saying he needs his licence.
Yeah.
Service New South Wales' advice is, well, we can only give you a test if you're about to be sacked, and we'd have to verify that with HR. This seems a fairly extreme situation. She has other examples, and in fact, I've got a family member who can't book even in person a test at our local service centres. They're simply not taking bookings even in person. So what are you doing to make sure that this backlog is being reduced at a reasonable time frame?
Yeah, I was asked this the other day, Mr. Searle, in question time, and there's about 17,000 tests in regional New South Wales that are the subject of the backlog. And look, as I said in question time, I unreservedly apologise. It's not good, but as you would understand, and any reasonable person would understand, it's because of the pandemic and the restrictions around it. Like when you're in that environment, sitting into a car, it's a high-risk environment. So my understanding is that Service New South Wales are now working their way through the backlog. There was also a challenge in relation to hiring driver testers during the period, so we're getting on top of that. But my understanding, if I could just ask Mr. Searle, my understanding is, and Mr. Rees will correct me if I'm wrong, that they did prioritise people that needed it for work.
Well, okay, well that's good. How is that prioritisation being implemented?
Well, I'll ask Mr. Rees to answer that, but that was my understanding.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. We do unfortunately have a flag. We're in the process of hiring 100 extra driver testers to help us get the plus the. We haven't enabled the customers to book directly the driver tests, so we are giving priority to.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I'm afraid I'm having trouble hearing it, and I think Hansard will be too. Can we hear?
Sorry, order. Is there any way that we can improve the quality of that audio? Can I just check with Hansard if there's a problem?
It's probably on the parliamentary network now. Probably using the Parliament House free Wi-Fi, which is pretty bad.
Intermittent.
Is it helpful if I?
Perhaps if you could turn your video off, that might help.
And maybe just lean a bit closer in, Damon, to the mic.
That's a great hack.
Thank you, Mr.
Turn
Reith.
the video off.
Is that any better?
Yes.
If you could try and repeat your last answer, that would be very useful, and then we'll move to crossbench time.
So just to build on Mr. comments, we do unfortunately have this backlog. We're in the process of hiring extra testers and extra trainers to help us build up that workforce and deliver those driver tests due to COVID. To driver tests available. We haven't yet re-enabled customers to direct those, but we are giving priority firstly to those drivers that need a test in order to maintain their licence. Some of our drivers, we're then giving priority to those tests that were booked but needed to be cancelled during restrictions. And to the example that was provided earlier, we do have a hardship assessment process on a case-by-case basis. And other examples where somebody to get their driver test. The example that was referred there about something depending on that licensing to commit on that's the time of that hardship.
It's still incredibly difficult to hear you, Mr. Rees, but I think we'll move on and see if we can maybe fix that before the next opposition round comes back. Mr. Banasiak.
Thank you. Just to close the loop on this duplicate accounts question, Minister, I appreciate you said that these people should contact Service New South Wales, but they have and have been told numerous times that you don't have an ability to deactivate duplicate accounts. So perhaps on notice, can you go out and find out whether that is actually the case? Because these people have been sort of left hanging since July with essentially an app that they want to use but can't use.
Yeah, more than happy to. And if you can just give me the details offline, I'm more than happy to follow that up for you.
Sure, we'll do. Just following up some questions that I had last estimates about the cybersecurity attacks. The 186,000 affected customers, how many of them were firearms licence holders, given that you do provide supplementary services to the firearms registry? How many of them were impacted, perhaps on notice and
I think I'm not sure we would have that level of detail. We'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah, so perhaps on notice, how many were affected and how many actually had to have new licences with new numbers issued?
Yeah, taken on notice.
Sure. Just turning to the audit report that was done on those attacks, and just trying to get a sense of how far down the recommendations you are in terms of improving how you handle this information. One of the ones that was significantly urgent was review the need to store scanned copies of personal information, and if still required, implement a more secure method of storing this information and regular deletion of material. Where are we up to with that? Are we still storing scanned copies of personal info, and how regularly are we deleting that material?
So I'll allow Mr. Rees to try and answer that question, and if he can't, I will elaborate for him if you like. Mr. Rees, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So two parts to the response. We automatically purge the period, so that's 2% from email service staff. The key recommendation to purge, we are meeting through the introduction of a new system, SHIFT, S-H-I-F-T. That gives a secure alternative to email to transferring sensitive information to New South Wales and our partner agencies. As of right now, Shift has been deployed to 74 of our service centres, now replaces these over 200 transactions, and we will roll out to a further 34 service centres by the end of November to complete the adoption of Shift across the organisation and across all that frontline by
End of Jan. Did you get that?
Yeah.
We can provide a more detailed response on notice if you like, but effectively we have it underway.
Yep.
We've done some piloting and we've significantly reduced the amount of email that's stored anyway, but in terms of eliminating it altogether, we continue to work with partners and we'll be into the agreed timeline of next year.
Okay.
Just so the committee is aware, we've organised for Mr. Rees to come down to replace Mr. Dent. Apologies, but that seems to be the best way that we can manage this. So, yeah.
While we're...
Mr. Rees, we'll see you back in the room shortly.
I ordered one of those muffins for him as well.
While we're waiting for Mr. Dent, I might just direct my questions to you, Ms. Hoden.
That's fine.
I think picking up on his answer, he was talking about a new system, and I do know there was an article by IT News in around October 19 which talked about you go into a new system in terms of sharing personal information, and it talks about using Microsoft products, including SharePoint.
Yeah.
Given that SharePoint is essentially an upgrade of Microsoft OneDrive and it's essentially email permissions based, how confident are you that that's going to be any better than just sharing directly over email?
So I'm not aware of the precise technical details. Mr. Rees might have some more information on that, or Mr. Wells might understand the product better, but we certainly wouldn't be moving to a new product unless we had full confidence in its security.
The article did say that you'd essentially evaluated it against other options. Are you aware that SharePoint has over 149 known vulnerabilities? And how does that stack up against the other 5 or 6 options that you looked at?
So I'm not aware specifically of 149 vulnerabilities, but it would be almost impossible for any system to never have any vulnerabilities. Organisations like that, and again, Mr. Wells might like to comment further, but any system that we do engage with, and any organisation that we do engage with, part of the requirement is that they would have regular vulnerability and cyber checks and would keep us informed of those incidents. And that wouldn't be unique to SharePoint as a supplier. It would be with all suppliers. Mr. Wells, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Secretary. I think it's a good point that there are always vulnerabilities in software. I think the figure we had last year on exposures was up to in the order of 10,000 across the system. The key point is that you always seek to improve and keep those systems up to date.
Perhaps
will be better to speak to.
Welcome back.
Will be better to speak to.
Voila.
Here he is. My apologies.
So
I thought you escaped.
we were just asked about the system that we're putting in place for email or storage of data. There was an article in IT News that related to the selection of Microsoft Teams or SharePoint, given that it's publicly reported that they have 149 known vulnerabilities. How did that compare to the other vehicles that we may have chosen? And I've suggested that all organisations would have some level of vulnerability. It's about how they're managed, how they're reported to us, how the patching is in play and how we recover.
Yeah, that's right. So Greg may have covered this. I think, first thing I'd say is vulnerabilities change over time. So I think at any point in time, the landscape is going to look different. It was very important for us, the system we put in place was not just technically secure, but was designed in a way that minimised the chance for our team to actually make mistakes in its use. A lot of the risk here is not just the technical storage of the information and the transmission, but the way it's handled as part of our business processes. And so a combination of the Microsoft technologies was used to give us that right combination of technical security and secure information handling. I get the impression I didn't come through very clearly, so just quickly to flag if you didn't catch it. We've currently deployed this into 74 of our service centres for 200 of our transactions. We'll have another 34 service centres implemented by the 11th of November, and we would have implemented it across our front line for all the relevant transactions by the end of January.
Okay. By June 2021, the report said that customers should have the choice to use multi-factor authentication. Is that in place? And if users aren't seeing that or prompted with that option, are they able to obviously contact you and address the problem?
So multi-factor authentication is in place for staff across 95% of our systems. That recommendation refers to multi-factor authentication for our customers. That's unfortunately not yet in place. There's some fairly significant work that needs to be done before we can enable that for our customers. We expect to enable that for our customers hopefully first half of next year.
Okay, and just perhaps on notice, how, I think you were coming down in the lift when I asked this, how does the SharePoint option compare to the other, I think it was listed maybe five other or four options. How does that measure against those in terms of vulnerabilities and performance?
Yeah, maybe easier to respond to that one on notice if that's helpful for time.
Sure, no worries. And just assuming the 6-month pilot that was done by your agency, that was obviously done with dummy data and not obviously live, real data.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool, thank you. That's it for me.
Great. Ms Fairman.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'll just go back to poker machines. Are you aware of the research that has been conducted in Victoria by the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation into the social costs associated with gambling in Victoria in financial terms?
No, not specifically.
So they have done, it was published in November 2017. It's called The Social Cost of Gambling to Victoria, and it looks at the costs to society, if you like, and the budget for low risk and moderate risk gamblers as well as high risk gamblers. So they have found that in 2014 to 15, the costs of gambling in Victoria were actually $7 billion. So this was, and I will get to the what we talked about in the budget before. So $2.2 billion for family and relationship problems, $1.6 billion for emotional and psychological issues, $1.3 billion for financial losses, and it goes on, $600 million in there for lost productivity and other work-related costs, for example. So that's a cost of $7.1 billion, and we referred previously to the forward estimates, the 62% increase in projections of income from poker machine losses. So has the New South Wales government done any work to determine the social costs of gambling in New South Wales, similar to what Victoria has done?
It would be the Office of Responsible Gambling. I'm sure they've undertaken some work, but I can take that on notice to see where it's up to.
I'm not sure whether they have.
Well,
I've heard from Gambling Alliance, just experts that work in this field, that in fact New South Wales does not undertake the same research. Will you commit as Minister to ensure that New South Wales does undertake research in relation to the social costs of gambling and release that publicly?
Look, I'm definitely happy to work with the Office of Responsible Gambling. It's a fair question, so I've got no problem with it. I will work with the Office of Responsible Gambling to see what can be done. It's a fair research point.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like a cost-benefit analysis, if you like, that is undertaken on a range of different things that the government does.
Fair research point. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. I wanted to just go to transparency in relation to poker machines. So we know that Liquor and Gaming provides quarterly data on gaming machine losses to some individuals and organisations, I understand, but doesn't publish this data online. It doesn't publish the quarterly data online. Is there a reason that New South Wales continues to not publish that data?
I may defer to Mr. Crawford on if it's okay.
Mr. Crawford?
Look, I'm not aware of the background of that process, so I'll take that unadvised.
So what I do have in front of me actually is an email. It's a request from the Alliance for Gambling and Reform to Liquor and Gaming, which is requesting that this data be provided or published. And the response, in fact, states that New South Wales does not allow the publication of venue-specific gaming financial information because of state-based taxation administration laws. Or is somebody aware of that via, is it Mr. Crawford?
I think Ms. Webb.
That arrangement's been in place for many years, but I'll have to find out the information, but it's been that way for a very long time, as I understand it.
I think Ms. Webb may
Sure.
know. Yeah.
Great.
No, I was actually going to say the same as Mr. Crawford, that's my understanding, that it's a legislative prohibition that stops us publishing more detailed information.
Okay, so you will let us provide on notice what exactly that legislative restriction is?
How it works. Yes, we can explain how it works, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, where am I? Who checks? So down to local impact assessments for poker machines. So who talk me through that process in terms of local impact assessment? Who checks the accuracy of local impact assessments that are written for applications for further gaming machines?
Members of the Department of Liquor and Gaming in the licensing department.
So do they check every single application? What's the process of them like checking the accuracy though? What process do they undergo?
Ms. Webb might know the answer.
Ms. Webb?
The applicant, there's a pretty thorough process that there's a case officer assigned. They look at the application, they work with the applicant on the material that's been submitted, and they check it through, and where necessary, a very vigorous dialogue with the applicant about any issues of concern.
Okay, I understand with these applications as well is that there's a payment. Is that correct?
There's an application fee.
The application fee, okay, and so there's a payment that only goes for 5 years instead of the lifetime of the machine as well, which, are you aware of what payment that is?
That's a contribution to the RGF. In the last couple of years, the government, I'll just turn off my video, I'm getting terrible reflux, just a sec.
That's an interesting term of art.
That's some powerful computer.
Brighten up the morning.
Very visceral.
What happens now is the legislation was changed about 2-3 years ago, where if a venue requires a new poker machine, for each new poker machine they pay to the RGF an amount calculated to represent 15% of the profits on each machine acquired for at least 5 years.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good explanation. Is there a reason that it just stops at 5 years, though? Like, how does that the 15% of profits for 5 years and that's it? Is there a reason it doesn't continue for the lifetime of the machine? Is that a policy? Something to do with government policy, Minister?
No, but I'm happy for Mr. Crawford to elaborate.
Well, prior to 2018, there was a contribution made, and it wasn't legislated at all, and it worked out roughly 10% of 1 year's profit on the machine. a review was carried out and we consulted with industry and it was a negotiation on percentages and how long. I think the life of most machines is around 5 years, but we came to a landing with industry.
Thank you. In relation to grants from the Responsible Gambling Fund, how are they made available to community organisations? Like how are community organisations notified and alerted to those available grants?
Look, you're starting to get out by my grade, but my understanding is that the submissions are made for consideration by the the trustees of the RG and from all over New South Wales, and allocations are made as of where there is need, and the applications are substantiated.
So who chooses the grants? How is that done in terms of successful applicants?
The applications are made and there's a board of trustees at the RGF, and they consider the various applications, competing applications consistent with their budget allocations, and they make those allocations.
Okay, so there's the board of the Responsible Gambling Fund has all of the applications before them and makes those decisions. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Crawford?
Yes, they've got a group at part of Liquor and Gaming New South Wales. They manage the business of the trustees of the RGF, and they basically distribute any material the applications, they assess them, they work with stakeholders, and then they present papers to the board meetings of the trustees.
Does the RGF have is there a public list of the grants given?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll take that on notice.
Minister, I don't believe that the Office of Responsible Gambling does keep a public list of grants, given the incredible controversy at the moment at both the state and federal level around grants that your government is dishing out. Don't you think that should be a public list?
I'll definitely take it on notice. I'll take it on notice. It's fair.
Okay. Do you have any concern? Do you have any concern hearing that there is potentially a lot of grants being handed out by the Office of by the Responsible Gambling Fund, by the board, and there may be a high degree of a lack of transparency in relation to those grants?
Again, from first principles, it should be made transparent. So, but that's why I'll take it on notice. I want to speak to them to understand the rationale behind it, and if there is no plausible explanation, then there should be published. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you. Back to the opposition.
Thank you, Minister. I think you put a figure of 17,000 backlog tests, I think, for driver's licences in the regions. Yep. Do you have a figure for Greater Sydney?
Mr. Rees might.
It's still moving, but we think at its peak that backlog could be in the vicinity of 100 to 120,000 driver tests that didn't take place through that period that potentially need to be done.
Okay, and can you, Minister, can you provide us with an estimated time horizon by which you think that backlog will be addressed?
Yes, I think it's an operational question. We expect that we'll be working through that backlog for much of next year, and balancing the demand for making up those tests that didn't take place with customers that need to get tested for the first time.
So what, it could take up to 12 months?
It could. It's a significant volume of driver tests. It's a significant percentage of our annual volume. We are, as I mentioned, I'm not sure if I came through clearly, we're hiring additional driver testers and additional trainers.
An extra 100, I think you said.
Yes, we're hiring 50 testers to replace some attrition that we've experienced, and then an additional 50 to lift our total number of driver testers above where it was pre-pandemic.
Okay, so for people who need a test and a licence for their employment, whether it's young apprentices or trainee nurses about to enter the workforce, for example, or what have you. How can those people sort of make sure that they get tested in time to take up their employment, or that they don't lose their jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not sure if I came across okay, but so at the moment we haven't provided the ability for people to book tests themselves at this point.
I noticed.
We are deliberately, we are prioritising customers that need a test in order to retain their licence,
Yes,
which
so the
impacts
older citizens.
some of our older demographic, that's right. We're then prioritising people that had tests booked that needed to be cancelled due to restrictions. Separate to that, we have a hardship mechanism that can look at case-by-case examples where there is an urgent need for people to be tested for the examples like you've given.
Okay, well, just taking those two examples, I've got my daughter who's going to be a nurse next year, but she needs a licence because she's going, hopefully, to the country. And then you've got Ms Atchison's constituent who's a 17-year-old apprentice who, absolutely must have his licence in order to be able to attend work and drive work vehicles.
Or he
what
will
can they
be
do?
sacked.
Well, he'll
Or
be
he
sacked.
will be sacked.
So what can these people do?
That's right. So we have a mechanism to assess those requests, and we will prioritise those bookings for
How do
those.
people find out about this? Because I myself have been to a Service New South Wales centre on behalf of my daughter, and I was not given that information about any hardship provisions. I made it very clear my daughter needed it for her employment, and the answer is, well, you just have to keep coming back. So how do people know about these hardship mechanisms?
Go watch budget estimates.
Yeah, so
Well, apart from watching budget estimates, yes.
I'll take that on notice. I'm not aware of the specific mechanisms we've used to communicate that process.
Okay. How do we find out about those mechanisms? Do we just ask at Service New South Wales for the hardship provisions, or
We'll take it on notice. We'll relook at our communication plan, and if there's opportunities to improve that to ensure that the awareness is there, we'll address that.
Minister, I might turn to business support, just some of those arrangements. As of the 25th of October, so 2 days ago, there were still 3,462 JobSaver applications waiting to be processed. What's the delay in processing those applications?
Well, I'll let Mr. Rees do the detail, but it depends, of course, when they put their application in.
Sure.
But the overwhelming bulk of the applications have now been processed. But again, I'll let Mr. Rees provide the detail in relation to it.
Yeah, it's really a factor of two things. One is we are still seeing a continuous flow of new applications for JobSavers. So a portion of those applications you're referring to will have only come in that day or the days prior. The second major variable there is where we need additional information from customers and additional interaction from customers. So that can result in the application process taking a more extended period of time. Where a customer applies and we have everything required as part of that initial application, those applications are being assessed and where appropriate approved in a number of days.
Minister, it's a similar story with the COVID-19 micro business grant. There are 7,761 applications awaiting processing. I presume it's a similar dynamic. Do you regard that as acceptable?
If I could just maybe clarify that. Micro grants and business grants are assessed and JobSaver are assessed slightly differently. The vast majority of those numbers that you're referring to, Mr. Graham, will be waiting on customers to confirm that they wish to proceed with their application.
Thank you. My question to the Minister was, do you believe these delays are acceptable?
In an ideal world, there are no delays, but we've got to balance it against making sure that we have the right settings to ensure that we're giving taxpayer money where it's due, and make sure there's appropriate accountability around it. So, so ideally, no delays. But if we need to ask legitimate questions, then I don't think people would be too critical of that either.
In relation to the COVID-19 business grant program, this program is now closed. There are roughly 1,432 businesses waiting for their applications to be processed.
Yeah.
New applications in this case won't be a problem. It's closed. Again, what's the delay in these applications?
So those will be applications where we're waiting on further information from customers.
Right, thank you.
And I'll give you an example, Mr. Graham. For example, somebody could put in an application, hypothetically, they could have a registered business address registered business address in Victoria, but they may be operating on this side of the Murray. Now, automatically that would flag, oh, you're a Victorian business. Why do you need, money from New South Wales taxpayers? And then they'd have to say, no, actually, this is historic. We've moved across. So things like that.
No, thank you.
They're not standard.
When restrictions were extended to regional areas, and particularly including the Hunter, on the 5th of August, why was the small business grant not extended to support those businesses with the financial shock? They got the lockdown, they didn't get the support.
Yes, so the business grant was tied to a period, not a geographical
well, with respect, Mr. Rees, this is a policy decision I'm asking the Minister, not the operational. I understand the operational point you're making. Minister, this is a policy decision of the government.
And Treasury set the policy.
Why did they get the lockdown but not the support?
Well, again, Treasury set the policy.
So not your fault,
well,
the Treasurer's fault.
Yeah,
this is the government decision.
Point of order.
Yeah.
No. Now, what Mr. Graham is doing is exactly what he did last time, which is ask a question. When the Minister starts to answer the question, Mr. Graham intercedes and starts to provide the answer that he believes he should be giving. Now, that is not how estimates is to work. What Mr. Graham needs to do is ask a question and then allow the Minister to provide his response.
Thank you. A certain amount of give and take and to and fro is allowed. I don't think in that instance there was much talking over each other, but if we could be aware of that, continue.
Yes, Mr. Graham, if it's helpful, I can try and provide the guidance you're after. Because
I'm asking about government policy decisions. So, Mr. Rees, I don't think that it'd be.
But I think there's a misunderstanding useful. Of the policies being quoted.
Yeah.
So the business grant you refer to was open for businesses, no matter where they were in New South Wales, that were impacted by restrictions for a defined time period. That included regional businesses. So whilst regional New South Wales wasn't in lockdown at that point in time, there were regional businesses that were impacted by the Sydney lockdown.
Mr. Rees, I do have. I'm only moving on because I do have a short amount of time, and I've got quite a lot of questions. I want to put to exactly. I want to put to the Minister. Again, feel free to deflect this to the Treasurer, the now Premier. But the small business grants.
Before we've even got to a question.
I want to ask about the small business grants alleviating cash flow constraints. There was a cut-off date for the 17th of July put on for those suffering a decline in turnover. Those cash flow constraints, as you know, extended well past that date. Why was that cut-off date in place?
Again, the policy settings were guided by Treasury. We implement them and we work with them on it, but that's a matter really should be directed to Treasury.
In late August,
I don't have the modelling that they would have.
In late August, as you know, the government was preparing to make changes to the eligibility criteria for small businesses and micro business grants, along with the JobSaver program. That would have broadened eligibility, I think is one way to characterise it. Service New South Wales actually, employees received an internal memo so they could then advise businesses, but the changes never happened. Who made that decision that the changes would not proceed?
Look, I'm happy to take that on notice unless you know the answer.
I'm not quite sure the change is being referred to. But
well, this matter's been raised with the Minister, I understand in correspondence. Just recalling what I looked through. Those changes...
You sent the letter, Mr. Graham?
It was a letter from our Shadow Minister. So
when was it sent?
Which one? I couldn't recall in the short time we've got, but I'd be happy to provide it to you.
Yeah, if you do that, I'm happy to respond.
Okay, if you could provide us an answer on that. But those businesses were obviously cut off by that decision. So the question is, who made that decision?
Yeah, happy to... Again, if this shouldn't be a gotcha moment. Like we're trying to provide information, but
I appreciate it.
If you give me the information, we'll try and answer it.
Mr. Rees, earlier this year you advised a Upper House inquiry. This was an online inquiry about the amount of grants that was at risk from fraudulent payout and the amount for recovery. At that stage, those figures were $16.23 million with $40,350 to be recovered. Could you update those figures as of today?
So at this point, we believe suspected fraud sits at 27.3 million paid. The amount recovered following conviction, I believe, is unchanged. What has increased is between our last session and now is the level of police referrals and the corresponding convictions.
So could you give us that figure?
So police referrals have increased. So we had 1,503 referrals that had taken place, I think, in our in the parliamentary inquiry. 800 of those had been inbound, 703 outbound. We now have made 938. This is application numbers, by the way. In response to inbound requests, 938 referrals to police. And initiated by Service New South Wales, 1,225 outbound referrals to police. And so the
what's
value,
the dollar value?
So the value. So I'm just trying to add some numbers as we go. So the total value across both of those. So for inbound requests, $3.5 million paid. And there's also 6.6 million of unpaid.
You're going to add those numbers and come back to me. I'll give you a moment to do that rather than do it on the fly. But as I understand the evidence, you've said fraudulent grants up from 16.23 last time you told us to 27.3 million.
Correct.
Money recovered remains at just $40,350. Is that correct? Just $40,350.
There's been a $10,000 increase.
Okay, so approximately $50,000 has been recovered of that 27 million.
That's correct. That's as a result of the convictions. There's a broader level that's been recovered outside of that. Yes,
Minister, I might turn to the Park and Pay app. I know you're a strong advocate, so I won't ask you to repeat your vigorous advocacy for this project.
I just love.
I do want to ask this.
I love open data, Mr. Graham.
Has any council adopted the Park and Pay app without entering into an agreement with Duncan Solutions to provide the payment gateway?
Well, I know that a number of councils have. I think we're up to 11 councils that have entered the. They've got the Park and Pay app, but
it's a specific question. Has anyone done it without adopting Duncan Solutions?
Look, I'm not aware. I'll ask Mr. Wells.
Mr. Wells will have the answer.
Thanks, Mr. Green. There's at least 3 infrastructure providers, smart parking enforcement, dog parking and centralised, and ChargeFox, who do charging stations across the city that are all providing information to the public.
I understand that there are a range of providers. The question is specific. Has any council adopted the app but not gone with Duncan Solutions?
Yes, so Mossman would be an example of that.
Right. Perhaps we're having a bit of trouble hearing you. Perhaps you could take on notice which councils have done that.
Yeah, Mossman, but I'll take that on that.
Thank you. Minister, how much has the government spent on advertising the Park and Pay app?
I'll take that on notice. Not sure.
To date, what has been the cost of the development and maintenance of the Park and Pay app to the New South Wales tax?
I'll take that on notice, but I know that the last time there was a report from NRMA a few years ago, they said that the cost of traffic congestion was about, traffic costs.
Well, Minister, I know you're an advocate. It's a very specific question. You've taken it on notice.
I'm giving you an answer.
No, he didn't actually take that component of the question on notice.
I am giving you an answer because you asked for the question, but I'm giving you an answer that the cost of traffic back then was about $7 billion a year. And I estimate it's probably closer to 9 these days. And a third of that traffic, Mr. Graham, was because people circling around looking for
Minister,
a traffic
you're
spot.
welcome back at Transport Estimates, but you've taken on notice how much it costs. I want to know from you how much it costs.
My job, Mr. Graham,
I want to ask you this question. You've recently
for public interest, not vested interest.
You've recently written to all New South Wales mayors urging them to adopt the Park and Pay app.
Absolutely, I'm proud of it.
How much revenue would that generate if it was adopted across the board for Duncan Solutions?
Oh, no idea.
One industry estimate is $5 million a year, in addition to whatever else they're being.
I don't know, Mr. Graham, but I'll leave it to Mr. Wells. But look, again, This is a platform where we're trying to obtain information for the public good.
I think you're offering to take that question on notice.
I'm actually telling you, I'll find out. But
Thank you.
Look, my job is not to look after vested interests, Mr. Graham.
I'm just going to do one more.
And we need to understand that there are a whole lot of industries, a whole lot of sectors that support the reform that I've been agitating for.
Minister, I'll turn to outdoor dining. You have
live music.
You've been the
How about the disco balls?
You were hoping to be the king of al fresco. Almost all of that has happened in the city centre.
I think the then
how
Treasurer,
many
now Premier.
How many
amended
venues are now operating in the trials with outdoor dining across the state?
How many? Sorry.
How many venues are now using the outdoor dining?
I don't have the latest
under the
figure,
trials?
but maybe who would know that from us? I don't have the latest figure.
I'll take it on notice.
Take it on notice.
Okay. The figure at 30 June 2021 was 311.
Yeah, I don't know.
Of those, 303 were in the City of Sydney area.
Yep.
None of them, almost none of them, were outside of the City of Sydney. Despite the fact we're in a pandemic, 7 of them were outside the City of Sydney.
I went to
Why
one.
are you applying this solution just to the CBD,
No, that's
not across
not right.
the board?
No, that's,
Well, that was the case on the 30th of June.
No, but, well, I went to one in Parramatta.
Yeah, 1. Okay, 6 to go.
All right. Well, there was a lockdown period, so just forgive me for not visiting everyone. But the point is,
This is unsafe not to apply it elsewhere. Why is it only happening in the CBD?
No. The point,
Graham, we went out to councils and we said, if you want to participate in this, please let us know. It's not like we were.
And it hasn't worked. Do you concede that? It now has to go much further.
I accept, and I've been agitating for councils to come on board to support, and that's why we put money towards
Happening
it
in one
terms of
council
further
area.
funding. Sorry?
It's happening in one council area. That's really where it's happening.
Well,
you hope to be the king of al fresco. You're barely the man.
No, I don't. I don't hope. I was anointed. I was anointed by the Premier.
Minister,
I was anointed by the Premier.
Minister, during the last round of budget estimates, I posed a number of questions to Ms Hogan, and there weren't substantive answers given in response. And I'll just raise one with you. My question was, can you find out and tell us on notice when the 2 agencies, that was Health and Transport, reported to Cybersecurity New South Wales the Excelian data breaches and when they in turn became aware of their own internal breaches? Ms Hogan said, yes, I can. On notice, the answer was, please refer to the response to question 11 in supplementary questions. That's where I asked when Health and Transport notified Cybersecurity. Answer is, go to the Health Minister, go to the Transport Minister. Minister, you're the Minister for Cybersecurity in New South Wales. Your agency must know when it was notified. Why did Ms Hogan fail to tell the Parliament in response to a question that information? And can you tell us when Cybersecurity was notified?
Well, I'm happy to defer to Ms Hogan, given that she's sitting right next to me.
I'm happy too, but I'd like an explanation as to why she didn't provide the information to the Parliament she said she would.
There could be a myriad of reasons.
Well, Ms Hogan can give us the answer.
I'm not going to put words in her mouth, and it's silly for me to do so, but there's a myriad of reasons, including...
Well, can you give me a substantive answer to that question? When was Cybersecurity notified of those 2 breaches by those 2 agencies?
We'll be able to.
Ms Hogan.
You might recall, Mr Searle, that at the last estimates, I was doing my best on cyber but didn't have Mr Wells with me as the leader of that area. And
Yes, but you took it on notice and you still didn't answer the question, so if you could now,
Mr Wells may have the answer to that question now.
Mr Wells.
Thank you. Yeah, we were informed on the 13th of June by Health.
Okay, and Transport?
Yes, I think that was the 20th. I'll just confirm as we're going through these questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you can answer that on notice. Minister, I also asked which departments were the subject of the 205 data security breaches reported to the Privacy Commissioner in 2020-2021. That was taken on notice, no answer at all given. So I think the Privacy Commissioner's with us. Could she provide a breakdown of which agencies were the subject of the 205 data security breaches?
Ms
Happy for it to be taken on notice, but if it answers
the Privacy Commissioner's here.
I'm happy to take that on notice. I don't have those figures here with me today.
If you could provide a breakdown, that would be very useful, Ms Gavel.
Yeah, I'll see what information we can provide
Okay. The third area was in relation to the 180 million. There was 240 million allocated to upgrade data cyber security.
Cyber.
Yeah.
Yep.
And 180 million was for the various clusters. And I asked how much had been allocated to the clusters and what was the money being spent on. The answer given on notice was at the end of July 2021, ERC and DAPCO have approved funding for each cluster to enable them to uplift their cyber security maturity. So I'm sure that's accurate as far as it goes. My question, both at previous estimates and now, is how much has been allocated to each cluster and what are they intending or have they spent the money on?
Mr Wells, do you have that to hand?
Yeah, so all of that, all that funding is being ring-fenced, so based on cyber upgrade plans that each agency has. So for the 180 billion, that is all commenced. Every cluster has started their reviews that are based on a risk assessment they make about their own cyber security. So all of that has commenced, and to date, 50 million of that has been spent, and those programs are in place.
Okay, and can you give a breakdown of how much was allocated to each cluster? Or is it just a global amount?
If you take that on notice,
if you could, that'd be...
If you take that on notice and provide that rather than just through each million.
Okay, that'd be very good. In relation to, I think the Cybersecurity Inquiry Minister, there was a first recommendation was to enhance the mandate given to Cybersecurity New South Wales to ensure compliance. In answer to questions on notice, it was said that a governance, risk and compliance team was established in February 2021 and they are developing an audit capability to provide additional validation and assurance of maturity reporting. Is that the implementation of Recommendation 1 of the Cybersecurity Inquiry report, or are there additional steps that the government will take to implement Recommendation 1?
Mr Wells, can you respond to that, please?
Yeah, so that's one of the components that will strengthen the policy and our management. Maturity assurance, all that governance and risk is one of them. Investment assurance is another around the side fund we've just talked about. Involvement in purchasing agreements. The governance function we already have in place for the Secretary's Board and DAPCO. So there's a range of functions that are already being put in place.
Okay, but I might have to return to that subsequently.
Thank you. Ms Fairman.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the publishing of data in relation to poker machines. So I understand that Liquor and Gaming publish half-yearly data on poker machine turnover and losses. That's correct, Mr Crawford or Ms Webb?
Can I, before you,
Sure.
can I correct a previous
Right.
answer
Yep.
in relation to the publishing of the grants? My understanding, I've been informed that it is in fact being published.
Do you know further detail on how that's published?
I'm happy to, Ms Webb.
Okay.
I'm happy to provide the details offline if you want, but I've been informed they are being published.
Okay, so thank you. Well, just going back to the publishing of the poker machine turnover and losses data. I understand that Liquor and Gaming published that half yearly. Is that correct?
That's my understanding that we currently do, but I can check that on notice for you.
Okay, I also wanted to just ask, I understand that some people, when they request it, such as journalists and stakeholders, can get access to quarterly data as well. So I'm just wondering why the Office of Liquor and Gaming doesn't publish the data quarterly and it only publishes it 6 monthly.
So I think on notice that we would explain the sort of underpinning of what we can publish and who we can publish to, so I can certainly add that information in as well.
Yeah, I think that publication in relation to legislation that you say restricts you from publishing it is around venue by venue data, not in relation to the quarterly versus 6 monthly.
I think I'll have to take it all on notice rather than guess. So we'll definitely answer all that detail in our answer on notice.
Okay, I'm also wondering whether the office collects data on losses after midnight. Ms. Webb, are you aware whether that happens?
I don't know if we specifically break it down that way. Mr. Crawford might know, but otherwise we'll take that on notice.
Minister.
We might request specific data from a particular venue, but generally I'm not sure that that's correct. I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Minister, the reason I'm asking about gambling losses after midnight is that one of two productivity commission, the Productivity Commission's review into the gambling industry has actually said that there would be significant benefits from requiring hotels and clubs to shut down their gaming rooms no later than 2 a.m. This is because of the strong evidence that higher risk gamblers represent a much greater share of those people playing late at night. Obviously, the influence of alcohol is a big factor. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Would you commit to having a look at that evidence and...
Definitely, if you can refer me to the report. Yep.
I will do that. I just wanted to now turn to the community consultation requirements around club grants. So, as I understand it, club grants can issue grants in terms of Category 1. They're called Category 1 grants. They're for projects that contribute to the welfare and broader social fabric of the local community. Local committees are required in all LGAs where the total pool of Category 1 grant funding from all clubs participating in club grants is $30,000 or more. And as part of that requirement, NCOS or an affiliate has to be, which is designated in legislation, has to be a member of those local committees. However, research has found from NCOS that only 30% of the required LGAs have a local committee. That have a local committee don't appear to have one. So 30% of those LGAs don't have a local committee. Is there a reason for that?
No, I'm not aware of the reason for that, but I'm happy to find out. But I was aware that NCOS raised those concerns.
So we've had in legislation that those local committees basically, need to be in place.
Yeah.
Firstly, there's no local committees in what appears to be 30%, but in fact, there's now an additional, of the 47 LGAs that do have a local committee, it seems that more than half of those don't have an NCOS representative. Does that concern you?
Yeah, I of course. I would have liked, and I had a discussion with NCOS at the time, and it would have been desirable if they remained as a representative, because I have high regard for NCOS, but they chose not to. But we need to work our way through to find out why those committees are not there. The local committees, that is, are not there.
So are you, to be clear, are you saying that it was a decision of NCOS not to be on those committees?
Yeah, my understanding is that they decided not to be there. Yeah.
Plus they're affiliated, their representatives as well, aren't?
That was my understanding. I hope I'm not misrepresenting their position, but that was my understanding, yeah.
So how long ago was that? When you found out?
I think I got a call. You're stretching my memory. Everything was been a bit of a haze for the last 6 months,
I agree.
to be honest,
Yes.
or 2 years.
2 years.
That's 3 months ago.
Okay. So as this is part, let's go back to the legislation.
And as you know, Category 1 and 2 is run by Clubs New South Wales.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Been the case since 98.
So that's right. So the legislation requires that there be a representative from NCOS or a similar, similar organisation representing social services and community organisations and those views, social equality, if you like. So what are you doing to ensure that those views are indeed represented on those committees?
Look, again, I will look at that issue because I remember having the discussion with NCOS, and as I said, I get on well with them, and I was upset that they were not going to be part of the process moving forward, but I could understand their position. Look, I'll reach out to Clubs New South Wales and see what the issues are there. But this is a scheme that has been set up by the Labor government since 1998. And as you know, there's there are definitely areas that for improvement there, no doubt about it.
Because I understand as well, one of the reasons that this is an issue is that those clubs, they can claim dollar for dollar tax rebates on poker machine profits over $1 million when they make grants to eligible community projects. I understand that there is a mechanism to check whether in fact they have indeed made it to eligible community projects, that it's all in compliance. This is under the gaming machine tax. It also prohibits Liquor and Gaming New South Wales from allowing a tax rebate if it's satisfied, based on the advice of local committees, that the club has not complied with the guidelines. But there's 30% of clubs that don't appear to have a local committee. So how can you be satisfied that these rebates are in fact genuine and that they're complying with it when they apply for those rebates?
Yeah, I'm getting advice on this issue right now, so I'll keep you posted.
Okay, all right. That's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Field.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, if it's okay, I might just turn quickly to Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford, I know that there's now an inquiry underway by Adam Bell into the Star, but have you asked for a clarification from Star about the allegations in the Sydney Morning Herald that $175 million was put through the poker machines at the Star by one individual who was later arrested by police on suspected drug trafficking charges?
No, we haven't. That's about the inquiry.
And I understand that, but the media reporting suggests that this information comes from internal Star documentation. The poker machines are still operating at the Star, are they not?
That's correct. I think they've opened up again post-COVID, yes.
What confidence do you have that the Star have put in place practices to prevent money laundering in their poker machines or through their poker machines in the time between now and that inquiry reporting back and the government yourself being able to consider any implications? Isn't this high risk?
Look, that's exactly the covered in the terms of reference I've given to Mr. Bell, agreed with Mr. Bell, and that's what he's looking at. So obviously there'll be consequences to the Star if he finds against them and that systems are not adequate.
Well, it doesn't take much to do the sums and realise just how much money could be put through those machines between now and potentially March, April or May next year when the inquiry reports back. And the evidence is quite clear. It says internal documents suggest that the Star was well aware of this information, in fact lavished access, meals, entertainment, accommodation on this individual, and it was only stopped because of the arrest of police. You haven't asked any questions about what other evidence they've got right now that might enable you to act?
The reality is we had commenced a process to appoint Mr. Bell several months before it was announced. We went through an exhaustive process and well before these allegations were made, we wanted to commence that inquiry. It's been 5 years since there was an inquiry under Section 31 to the Star, and we felt the learnings we had from the Poker inquiry is appropriate that we bring on an inquiry as quickly as possible, which we did. Subsequent to that, these matters have gone out to the public domain, but we're already confident. We want to know what their money laundering and anti-money laundering systems are, whether they're adequate, and what steps it's to ensure that organised crime does not infiltrate their business.
Thank you. Minister, are you comfortable with the fact that the allegations are that the Star knew this was happening? They're operating these poker machines now and will continue to do so until such time as Mr. Bell reports. Is that acceptable?
Oh, look, I have every confidence in Mr. Crawford. He's demonstrated time and time again that he's not scared to make the big calls, particularly as we've seen with Crown. And I'll be guided by Mr. Crawford. And as he already indicated, he's got the appropriate mechanisms in place with Adam Bell being appointed before the allegations were aired. So, look, I'll be guided by Mr. Crawford, but I back you 100%.
Okay. Let's talk about some other allegations. Troy Stoltz, who I'm sure you're familiar with, was an employee of Clubs New South Wales and effectively, as a whistleblower, raised information in the public realm and through information provided to the Commonwealth Parliament that as many as 95% of clubs in New South Wales were not complying with their obligations under anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism laws. Have you sought any advice as to whether or not those allegations are true?
In relation to the 95%, they are allegations that were, I think were they raised in his federal court proceedings?
No, they were raised in federal parliament because the information, I understand, was given to independent Andrew Wilkie. They've subsequently been published in the media, and this was information that came directly from board papers of Clubs New South Wales.
Mm-hmm.
Have you sought any advice as to whether or not that is true?
Well, not specifically, but I know it's an issue of concern, and that's why the issue was agitated in relation to poker machines, in relation to the Bergen inquiry, and that's why I put forward a solution in relation to cashless gaming.
Understand. Mr. Crawford, have you sought any advice, asked for a please explain by Clubs New South Wales as to whether or not that allegation by Mr. Stoltz is accurate?
Not specifically Mr. Stoltz, but I think, Mr. Field, you can assume that the two big things in ILGA's focus at the moment are anti-money laundering in clubs and pubs and also minimisation measures.
So you can see the connection I'm drawing here, Minister, right? We've got the Bergen inquiry into Crown, doesn't even operate a casino in New South Wales yet. Substantial investigation, huge findings. We've now got a substantial investigation into the Star, and it's been extended given the recent allegations. But these allegations by Mr. Stoltz, 95% of clubs in New South Wales not complying with their obligations under money laundering and counter-terrorism laws were made at the start of 2020. But not really anywhere near the same reaction from the government or the regulator or or ILGA, and I'm just trying to understand why the difference.
I think, in fairness, Mr. Crawford did indicate just in his most recent answer that ILGA is taking this matter very seriously. And look, what transpired with Bergen is that in many ways she shone light on an area that was in the dark for a long, long time. And, it's a credit to Mr. Crawford and the team that they put that inquiry in place. Because if it wasn't for New South Wales, I have no doubt the Victorian inquiry wouldn't have gone underway, and I've got no doubt the WA inquiry. So, credit where it's due, but agree, there is definitely... there's more to be done in this space.
And I just want to be on the record, credit where it is due, and I think the public should be very grateful to Mr. Crawford and ILGA for putting those inquiries in place.
Agreed.
We've been well informed by the Bergen inquiry, and I'm sure the Bell inquiry will be very useful for us considering the regulatory framework in New South Wales. I wonder if you might think if we'd benefit, the community would benefit, the employees and the members of clubs in New South Wales would benefit, the police would benefit, and others, if we had a similar level of inquiry into the links between money laundering and poker machines in clubs and pubs as well in New South Wales.
Look, as is always appropriate, the ILGA, and the I in ILGA is independent, they provide advice, and it's always appropriate for government to pay careful consideration to that advice.
So I just would like to go to that because the Casino Act is quite different from the Act that applies to clubs and pubs in New South Wales. Mr. Crawford, do you have sufficient powers under the legislation affecting clubs and pubs to implement a similar inquiry to what you have done for the casinos, for the casino in New South Wales and for the proposed Barangaroo casino?
Under section 205 of the Government Machines Act, I think the Minister on submission wants to request us to carry out an inquiry. And all I can say to you, Mr. Field, is that things you're touching on are very much a work in progress with Elmer at the moment.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left for the opposition.
Oh, giving away questions.
Minister, it's been
Brangelina.
343 days since the liquor amendment.
What was that?
It's been 343 days.
Since when?
Since the
Since the
Liquor
last
Amendment
question.
Nighttime Economy Act 2020 passed the Parliament, and thank you for your vigorous
thank
work
you.
on that.
No, I want to thank you,
How
Mr.
many?
Graham, because it was a kumbaya moment between us.
How many special entertainment precincts have been established?
I'm not sure. I'm happy to take that on notice.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.
That's it.
Come on, John.
You're the Brangelina team in this committee room. You know that, don't
Minister, in relation to supplementary questions, I think it was answer 11, your agency said, and I quote, where an incident involves a possible criminal offence, Cybersecurity New South Wales or the impacted agency refers the incident to the New South Wales Police Force for further investigation, unquote. How is the assessment of whether an incident involves a possible criminal offence carried out by your agency?
Do you want to answer that? In terms of
It's sort of a broad question. It would depend, but if Mr. Wells is able to comment.
Mr. Wells, are you with us? Yep.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so, wherever we're obviously aware that data has been breached or taken, or wherever there is any malicious intent from malware or ransomware, anything to that extent, we refer that to police, and we have a very close working relationship with some.
Who carries out the assessment and what skills, experience and qualification do they have?
So this is so we make that notification very early on with New South Wales Police and work together with them. So we don't wait to do a lot of assessment before we refer that. That's an immediate referral. We work closely.
All right. I've got some other questions, but the sound is a bit indifferent. I might put them on notice.
don't mind.
But I've got some other questions for you, Minister. In relation to the data sharing application, I think Service New South Wales is using. I think this was in relation to the data breach, and you investigated.
data sharing application.
Well, I think. Isn't it the case that you now have a secure data transfer application so that instead of using email to share customers' data, you're using...
Yes.
So we discussed that, I think, at the last estimates briefly.
Yeah.
So did the government go out to tender in terms of providing that service, or is it an in-house function?
To the best of my knowledge, no, we didn't go out to tender. We already had a number of the platforms in use and available within the department, and we chose to build on top of those platforms to meet our particular business needs using internal capability.
Okay, so you didn't have to secure any private sector involvement to carry out this function?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Now, I understand the function has only been rolled out to about half the Service New South Wales centres in New South Wales. Is that correct? And can you provide a time frame for rolling it out completely?
Yeah, so as of right now, we're in 74 centres and covering about 200 business processes. By 11th of November, we'll add an extra 34 service centres and we'll be done across all our service centres and all relevant business processes by the end of January.
And Mr. Rees, apologies for jumping around, but could you tell us how many driving tests are conducted on an ordinary basis in an ordinary calendar year without COVID?
So ballpark in a year, we could do a couple of 100,000 tests a year, but let me respond on notice with more accurate data if that's helpful.
Okay. How much time do we have, Madam Chair?
Got about 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
Have to use it.
Well, perhaps at the risk of straining the sound, I might have to ask this question then. In response to questions taken on notice, I think at page 13, Minister, your agency said agencies are also required by cybersecurity policy to report intelligence relating to cyber events that may not result in cyber incidents. This allows Cybersecurity New South Wales to engage other stakeholders, such as the Australian Cyber Security Centre and the New South Wales Police Force. Can you tell the committee what kind and volume of intelligence has been reported by agencies to Cybersecurity New South Wales in that last financial year, 2020-2021, and how much since 1 July this year?
I can't comment on the volume, but look, obviously there'd be only a certain amount of material that we'd be prepared to disclose, given
Are you sure? I'm just asking about the volume and the kinds at a high level.
I don't know if Mr. Wells
Greg?
is in a position.
Mr. Wells, sorry.
I don't know, this is simply you can't say that Mr. Sovereign significantly in terms of volume, in terms of complexity.
Okay. What are, and I'm just referring to the language of the response given by the department here, what are cyber events as distinct from cyber incidents? I assume these are sort of technical terms?
Yeah, so we have a tiering there, Mr. Searle. We talk about events as the sort of things that are happening all the time across the sector. Incidents is where there's been a breach of information or there's been an impact to systems or something that's relatively